Hey everybody, thanks so much for jumping into this afternoon session and joining us to talk about this book. We're really proud and excited about this project. And so for those who don't know me, I'm Colonel Arnel David, Vice President in the CAA Association. And just to start off, want to give a big shout and thank you to General Van Roosen and especially General Chris Stockel, our underpaid publicist who's been kind of operating like a publicist, helping get the book out there. We did a massive plug last year as a start for getting the book idea rolling out with the AUSA, which is a pretty big platform where we had an article that Nick and Sean and I wrote called Getting Competition Wrong, which has a big theme of the book inside of it. And it's just getting that conversation going within the Army specifically and even more broadly because they have such a big audience. So without further ado, get those things out of the way. And of course, to our sponsors that enable this, Holshek, who's always does the thankless work of helping set this all up, this roundtable and a lot of our events. So thanks to him and to everyone for this morning. So a lot of good discussion already. And so we got this book with Cambria Press, which if you're not familiar with them, it is a very rigorous, very astute, prestigious academic type of press in New York, based in New York. And so they came out I think it started about 3 years ago, where they approached me about, we had a successful book with, I co-wrote with General Charles Cleveland, Dr. Ben Jensen, Dr. Sue Bryant, and it got it's one of the books that's done really well for them in their national security, conflict and security series. And therefore they asked me if, they saw us publishing, they say, you ready to do another book? I was like, I don't know. I just started a Ph.D. Not sure I can. And then I came back to them with the idea of, proposing that there's a big gap in the literature and scholarship on what is it that we do, a gap between a soldier and a diplomat, where we call it the Warrior-Diplomat and what we do as civil affairs forces. And they took it. They said, yeah, let's do it. An edited volume. Initially had Sean as a co-editor. Then we brought on Nick to help improve our writing. He's such a great writer and, cleaning up our language, but, and then make it more interactive. So as you can see, I'll go through the chapters, but we set off on this journey, which I would argue for me was one of the most hardest and most rigorous tasks I've had to tackle in a long time. It's no joke trying to get a book complete, even an edited volume with all these smart people that you can see here on the slide. It was still quite a challenge to do everything we have going on in our day jobs and everything else going on. It's just still a hard thing to do to stitch together and cohere a narrative and weave in all these different ideas into a packaged book that's going to get peer reviewed, a blind peer review by people in our community, in their agency, and also in academia. And it was a rough, brutal peer review where we had to make some significant edits to make the book tighter. And so what I'll do now is I'll turn over Nick in a minute, is just kind of go through, as you can see, and I'm not going to read to you all the different chapters, but I'll just kind of highlight a bit about each chapter. So in the introduction, we kind of set the frame of the problem, we set the environment, that why we're writing, why now, what are we proposing, what is this Warrior-Diplomat thing? We start that in the introduction, and as we link to the national security approach to strategy making, and then to campaigning and competition, as was discussed this morning, we think that we're on the wrong trajectory, in that we would argue that it's less about just buying a lot more platforms and tech. It's about understanding on the ground what's going on, which I think, speaking to all of you, I see all these familiar names out there, and you guys all get this. But we set out to lay the framework for this book by arguing that. And then chapter 1 builds on that by talking about how this new great game, strategic environment, with James Machich, Kyle Sterone, and Kevin Chappell, 3 CA officers that go over that environment, talk about how things are disaggregating, how it's more local, hyper-local, the problems that we're facing, and just showing the importance of having to be on the ground to understand what's going on in the environment. And it switches over to Dave Allen, which I think my mate's online right here from the UK. Dave he's got some experience in SOF in the UK side. He's also a lieutenant colonel in the British Army now, logistics and working in the Dave, I think you're still in the 77th Brigade, in the 6th Division, doing a lot of the information advantage type stuff. So he lays out, and Dave could and chime in as we're going on here, but he lays out the gray zone, thriving the gray zone, so that the gray zone, as ambiguous as it is with who's doing what, he lays it out as an opportunity. And there's some pretty good charts and illustrations there to show how there's this escalation ladder and building on theory, existing scholarship and theory on how we can actually operate more effectively in the gray zone as warrior diplomats of civil affairs and alongside our interagency partners. And then chapter 3, Dr. Alex Nestick led out with Dan Cleany and myself on really just, again, fleshing out the human domain. And I heard Tracy Benoit saying that's coming to the fore again, which is great, because we make the argument that a theory of the human domain and what is this environment that we approach, the global commons, the importance of humans and us being on the ground to engage with them in human networks. And then we go into civil reconnaissance, Albert O leading out with Guy Berry, Sergeant Lucas Vaughn, and Master Sergeant Acosta. And they really do a good job of outlining what is this civil reconnaissance thing? What does this mean within, for the Army and in the Marine Corps writ large, how it needs to become a thing for the Joint Force? This should be a joint, a joint task list. If you guys are familiar with the Joint Force, the UJITL, like this should be a task, civil reconnaissance, what does it mean and how do we do it? And they lay that out, and it builds nicely into what Dr. Nick Krohley talks about in terms of canceling the crosswalk. How we just kind of take PMEZ and ASCOPE and we make this, this taxonomy of these different methodological devices to explain the environment, where we kind of just end up binning stuff into boxes, and like that's not really, we get sold as analysis, which it's not. And he does a great job of arguing an investigative framework that civil affairs and warrior diplomats can use to interrogate the environment with more granularity. And then as practitioners, Dan Cleany and Kyle Atwell, Special Forces officer, and also the founder of the Irregular Warfare Initiative at West Point, they talk about their activities in the Lake Chad Basin, where they're engaging and doing a lot of stuff with their agency partners to counter Boko Haram and other malign influences. And then finally, going to the final three chapters, and this is like a shift to what do we do about all this, is Sue Gannon and Assad Raza, they go into how we can improve our formations by just doing cross-component, cross-pollination. And I saw a lot of that discussion this morning, how might we do that? And there's some great data in there and charts on what is our force structure like, what's going away, what's coming offline, what's deactivating, but also what can we do about it? And they reference some really great studies from the reserves. There's a commission done on the reserve component and how we can integrate better across the Army. So they use that study and some other scholarship to make an argument that we should have greater integration through, just cross-pollinating, different components, all composed. And then our Marine Corps brethren, Diana and Rob Boudreau, they came and put a chapter in about Joint Information Fusion Synergy, about Marine Corps civil affairs, really good historical treatment of how the Marine Corps civil affairs are getting out there and doing stuff. And then Chris Olszek, from the last panel, you saw Stefan talking about what's going on with NATO CIMIC, how not just the NATO CIMIC, but also UN CIMIC, and how CIMIC is seen abroad in that perspective, and how we can build a civil military network to engage better. And then we conclude with some recommendations. And I'll pass over to Nick now to talk to how we wove some different threads of thoughts through the book to make a couple punchy points. So over to you, Nick.
Yeah, thanks, Arnel. And there are three, call it big ideas that kind of underpin this book. The first two of which were in that AUSA article that Arnel referenced, to the talk rather, in the article we did with MWI. But the first is that, put simply, the world's falling apart. And when we talk about strategic competition, it isn't just a question of China stepping up with its own view, Russia trying to do what it wants to do in its spheres of influence. It's that the wider set of institutions, frameworks, relationships that we've relied upon, the rules-based order that we helped create, is increasingly unreliable. And we have to find our way in chaos, in uncertainty, in a massively dynamic environment. And so, that's not in and of itself massively controversial. I don't think. I think you'd be hard pressed to find someone who says that everything's fine and the international order is holding up pretty well. It objectively isn't. But if you go from that and you go into this competitive narrative, how do we think about competition? And the dominant narrative is talking about competitors head to head. We're competing with China, we're competing with Russia. You can weave, an Iran and a North Korea into that conversation if you want to. And what we push pretty hard in the introduction and weave in throughout the book is that that's only part of the picture, and it's a limited part of the picture. And you have to not just see the competitor, you have to look at the playing field. And you have to really understand the context of conflict, the context of competition. And again, we're pretty critical of ourselves and of the wider community early on that this was our undoing in Iraq and Afghanistan. The J2 silo did what it did extremely efficiently, thinking about Al-Qaeda, Mahdi Army, the Taliban, etc. But the broader contextual view of where all that fits in the human domain and what we're trying to achieve, how we're trying to achieve it, that never matched up. It never got it done. And I can speak for and with the editors here and the contributors, I think, too, is that there's a sense that we can kind of close the door on the last 20 years and get away from these messy, small wars and focus on head-to-head conflict. And I think that's a huge mistake. And we say quite directly, we're going to keep losing if we don't take, a structured, rigorous, granular, operationalizable, if that's a word, view of context, of the civil domain, the civil environment, call it what you want to call it. And that gets to the third big idea in the book, which I want to focus on here, is CA's role in dealing with all this, right? It's our view that there's really no one else in DoD who's going to step up and provide that view, that insight into the human domain, into the civil environment. Again, when we deal with this, you could argue, I think, compellingly that the Department of Defense is overrepresented or overly influential as an instrument of foreign policy. But that is the case. That is reality, and the military has to do things beyond just the application of violence. And to do that, you have to have contextual understanding. And who's going to provide that? Okay, and we talk about tech and the pros and cons of the fourth industrial revolution, and put forth the argument that we still need people, and that the people of CA have the potential to provide an absolutely essential and extraordinarily valuable set of insights to complement technology, to provide that contextual view of the competitive landscape. But how do we get there, right? And that's where you can look at a lot of the content in the chapters is laying out an aspirational view of what CA could be, of what CA ought to be. And it raises some questions, how serious is our approach, not just CA's, but DoD's approach to the human domain? How serious are we about really caring, frankly, about civil considerations, civil dynamics? And how do we square, if we say we are serious about it, how do we square that with the fact that you dig into doctrine and you're left with, ASCOPE and PAMISI, and CA is resourced the way that it is and getting squeezed further. So, this is kind of a rallying cry. There's some criticism in there. I was grateful for Arnel and Sean for roping me in as the outsider, as a civilian. I can be maybe a bit more, not critical for the sake of criticizing, but just give an outsider's view of, hey, what could this be? And I offer that as a believer in CA. And so that's what we've tried to advance here, talking about the need to get sharper, to get better, and this vision of CA as, global scouts really in the human domain, trying to understand first and foremost what's happening out there. And once we have that understanding, we can start to talk about what do we want to do about it, and how do we want to exert influence? What do we want to do to shape the environment really across this competition continuum? So I'll close out there. Got some good press. Arnel is working his incomparable network here. And I was grateful for the opportunity. And I think there's something in this book for CA as a practitioner. And there's something in this book that CA leadership can say to people on the outside. You can drop it on their desk and say, hey, look, this is what we could be, right? This is what we want to be. We just have to get there. So thank you very much.
Hey, thanks, Nick. And I know some of the chapter authors are online right now, so I'll let them, if they want to plug in as well. But as we transition to that, I believe about 8 minutes or so for questions before we get our next guest keynote speaker online, is just why would you want to pick up this book? And some of you already commented. Thank you for already, you guys already saying you bought the book or you have one in hand already. So thanks for that. But no one's here to make money off these books. Like, these books don't make money. We're out here trying to put our ideas out there through this rigorous process of a peer-reviewed academic press called Cambria Press. And why would you pick up this book? And I would argue that you could see from the endorsements and reviews there that we had already early on from General Zenny, Brigadier General Valerie Jackson, who's now, Deputy Commander in CGTFOA in Africa, to Dr. Nadia Shallow, who wrote the 2017 National Security Strategy with, I think she's been a big ally of ours, Friendly Forces for the Civil Affairs Association. Most of you already know her. And then down below, you might know him, but Doug Mitchell. So it's from the creative arts world, the producer of Mad Max Fury and Happy Feet and a lot of other movies, is just talking about, giving a good quick check on the book. So, well, why would you pick up this book? And I think one thing it might help most of you on, whether you're a practitioner, a civil affairs professional, or interagency partner or academic who's looking and studying this, is that because it's peer reviewed, because we had to cite, through rigor, references and use scholarship to tighten up our narrative, that there is language. Like we talk about strategy, we talk about campaigning, competition. And I think this for you, for all of you, that this narrative, this language that we use, this grammar, it's not done in a way that's like an echo chamber of buzzwords that we can bounce off each other. It's written in a way that's going to communicate to policymakers, to our interagency partners, and just to really just talk to this more intelligently, like what we're trying to do in terms of first principles, as Nick laid out very eloquently about what do we, how do we see the environment, and then how do we plug therein to do some things. And so I think for all of you, this book could help, and really hope you do pick it up and get it out there. The costs are up really high. We did our best to negotiate with Cambria Press on the cost per book, but we'll see what we can do in terms of constantly negotiating with them, using our CA skills to negotiate a better discount. But we'll pause there to see if there's any questions.
Yeah, and I'll just jump on Giancarlo in the comments. Talking about Congress as an audience, this is something that really comes out at the end of the book, that we try to draw out very deliberately. Is there's a give and take here that isn't happening the way that it needs to. Because we can sit, I say we royally, like CA can sit here and try to figure out what it wants to be, the vision it wants to offer. And there have been very evident efforts toward that. They've shifted around a bit over the past 5 years, but there's been a clear attempt, a serious attempt at doing that. But at the same time, what's the outside message coming in? What is the demand signal from Big Army, from the soft community, from different stakeholders in the interagency for CA type stuff, right? Because there's a lot of things in there. CA, for me on the outside looking in, I think you've got an impossibly broad mandate to own, the 90% of the world that's not the enemy, or 90% plus, right? At least that. How do we do that? And there has to be a dialogue, I think, between senior leadership and CA and I'd say their customers, coming from a commercial side, like they're customers, yeah, in DOD, in the interagency, saying, what is it you want from this? And the answer may not be clear, right? Because no one has, that's the thing we have to pin down. And that's where a book like this, you can take the arguments, you can leave them, right? It's a particular view of what CA can be, focused on understanding, focused on that civil reconnaissance mission as what underpins all the other good stuff that CA can do. But it's a way to push that conversation, to focus the effort of someone who isn't thinking about CA and may have some vague ideas about it, but doesn't know what to do with it and isn't instinctively inclined to say, hey, this is important. This is a resource, again, to slam down on a desk or two and say, hey, ma'am, sir, this is what we're talking about. This is what we want to be.
So we got, again, a couple minutes here for a few questions before we go to we'll just take 2 or 3 more minutes and ask questions. So Paul Ellis, mate, you go on, ask your question. Do you have your mic? It's kind of long here, trying to scan it, about integration.
Yeah, Roger, cons check.
There you go, good.
It's broadly just in the spirit of the book. And first of all, congratulations to you and all of the other co-authors. It's a great book. And thank you for everybody who's participating today. The question is, there's a lot of overlap between stratcoms, info ops, psyops, civil affairs, media, public affairs, et cetera, and we have clearly overlapping target audiences, if not entirely the same target audience. How do we go about cohering all of those efforts, all of those resources, when at the same time we've got limited amount of those resources and expertise in the field and more demand than we can service?
It's a good question. I'll start off, Nick.
Yeah, I can jump in. This is actually something we worked on for the Land Warfare Center in a doctrine note about a year ago. We want to have integrated action, right? We want to tie all these lines of effort together to deliver effects. the missing piece here is an integrated understanding. If all these different efforts proceed from a shared understanding of reality, where we see enemies and adversaries as a feature of the broader human environment, right? To use the British doctrine. If we can see competitors, enemies, adversaries as a feature of the human domain, all right, we have a single shared understanding of the problem, and we can build out complementary lines of action, integrated courses of action to deal with it. And that's really, you're closer to the book than maybe you realized, right? Because that's a huge thing we're pushing here, is the need to integrate contextual understanding of the civil environment into that very narrow, very structured, very focused J2 view. And that, to our mind, I think is a huge step toward integrating lethal and non-lethal effects, is seeing the human domain as an integrated whole, not as, silos of excellence.
And I'll build on that, Paul, which is a great question, because where I sit now, I'm in the Joint Advanced Warfighting School with 45 other joint warfighting partners across the services. And when we start going into our planning and they look at, well, how do we do this stuff? Oh, civil affairs, that's the phase 4 stabilization stuff. I'm like, no, we're through all phases, doing stuff. And me being, I'm civil affairs officer now, I'm a strategist, and working with our senior leaders, they really don't understand what we do. And so this is why that was a kind of a motivation for us to kind of get a book that can package exactly what it is that we do rather tightly to communicate that capability. Because I would argue that a lot of them don't know. So like they don't know exactly what we do. And again, if they're thinking that we're just phase 4, stabilization type actors coming in after the fact, then obviously they get that wrong. And so that it's all of our jobs to kind of get that narrative right. And I think the book, by getting a book out there to contribute to the body of literature on this stuff will help. I know it'll help, and we're going to get it out there, spreading it out, getting a copy into, the Sec Army's hands and the DepSec, Kathleen Hicks, people that have written about CA in the past. We're going to get them a copy of this thing and get it on their desk. So to get the word out there. But thanks for that question. This is commander's business, obviously. So when you integrate all those things you talked about, Paul, it's commanders need to do that. It's not a J39 thing. Commanders need to be the ones understanding what this all is. So hopefully the book will help. Any final questions? I think I see we're at time. So I think we'll just call it there. So thanks everyone for participating and plugging in. I'm going to hand it back over now to, I think, General Dan Ammerman, who's going to set up the next, our keynote speaker. So thank you very much to the CA Association, everybody, and over to you, General. Jeremy, I'm still not hearing you, sir. I see the Honorable Ann Witkowsky's online. So, ma'am, do you want to do a mic check and see if your sounds okay?
How do I sound?
Clear. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, great. Thank you.
We'll start out the general here.
I'm going to go off mute. Hello. Sir, how are you? Nice to see you.
General Van Ruzen, you might have to plug in, sir.
So I see Dan has popped up. Dan, can you do a quick mic check? You're muted right now. Can you double check? You're good on the Zoom side, so it's something on your computer.
General Ammerman, double check the caret next to the mute button. If you click the up caret, you might want to change your mic to whatever source mic you want. That might be the fixer.
So down the lower left-hand corner, you see the mute. If you move your mouse, the mute will come up. And if you do the little up arrow, you'll see select a microphone, and you can possibly select something different than what you've got right now. All right, well, let's, if I can then jump in for you. I'm not really prepared to do an appropriate job to introduce Assistant Secretary Ann Witkowsky. It's frankly, an honor to have the opportunity to see you again. You have an amazing background working with the Department of State, supporting the United Nations, supporting civil affairs across your background. Without going too much into that, we are delighted to have you join us today. Hopefully, Dan will be able to address his microphone problem as he goes forward into the session here that you're the keynote speaker for, which is Global Fragility Act, Integrated Deterrence and Civil Affairs. So with that, let me turn over to you, Ann. Wonderful to see you again, and over to you.
Thank you, Major General Van Roosen. Hugh, it's great to see you again as well. And Major General Ammerman, Dan, thank you so much for both of you for including me. I think I saw Chris Holshek here earlier, and want to pass greetings to him as well. Yes, hi, yes. It's wonderful to be back here. It's been a while, and I want to just thank you and members of the Civil Affairs Association for inviting me to speak to you today, with you today. The last time I spoke to this distinguished group was nearly a decade ago, and I was serving in OSD policy as a DASD for Stability and Humanitarian Affairs. We were working on an early version of what became the revisions to Directive 3005 on stabilization. I've long appreciated the opportunity to exchange views with this thoughtful group and to be engaged on a few of the important policy issues that are central to your community. And I look forward to some back and forth today after my remarks, if there's time. Now, as I sit across the river, if you will, with the CSO Bureau, I continue to view the civil affairs community as key partners in the context of a broader partnership with DoD. So I'm very happy to be here. As you know, those of you who've worked with me, I truly believe that interagency cooperation is so crucial for the type of complex environments and challenges that we are facing in conflict-affected and fragile states. To this end, we have not only a relationship working closely with OSD SOLIC, but we have now what we call a 3D partnership. OSD SOLIC, CNSP, USAID's Bureau of Conflict Prevention and Stabilization, and us together. We are the key 3D partners in the initiative I'm going to talk to you about today to implement the Global Fragility Act of 2019, which you've heard a little bit about, I think, threaded through the morning, and its related US strategy to prevent conflict and promote stability, which for the purposes of this talk, I'll simply refer to as the strategy. I want to focus first on the Global Fragility Act and the strategy, give you a little bit of background, where we stand in implementation and where we're headed in the next few years. And then given the topic of integrated deterrence, let me talk a little bit about how I see the strategy as a concept of integration. And I was pleased to see ASD Mayor, here at ASD Mayor, pull these strands together as well. And then finally, I'll touch on how we need help from you, the civil affairs community, our DoD partners, as we go forward. So a little bit of background. The Global Fragility Act is grounded in the principal stabilization lessons learned from 20 years of hard-earned experience, including but not limited to wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. The Act incorporates these lessons, such as the need for a long-term plan and requirements for a locally driven approach, and puts them into law, aligning funding and authorities to implement them. One thing that's important to know about the Global Fragility Act is that it's bipartisan. Members of Congress from both parties transformed the ideas behind the GFA, which were sourced to a coalition of civil society organizations and a task force previously that was situated at USIP, putting it into law. This united and ongoing commitment to the law is crucial for many reasons, among them our ability to plan for the longer term. GFA's associated U.S. strategy to prevent conflict and promote stability lays out a whole of government, evidence-based 10-year approach to fostering peace and long-term stability. It does this through integrated U.S. diplomacy, development, and security sector engagement through strong and diverse local partnerships with the dual goals of strengthening resilience in partner states and enhancing the way our government approaches these challenges. To step you back a little bit, about a year ago in April 2022, President Biden announced the launch of the strategy's implementation with priority partners, as we were required to select under the law. And those are Haiti, Libya, Mozambique, Papua New Guinea, and the coastal West Africa region of Benin, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, Guinea, and Togo. These countries, as you know, reflect a wide variety of challenges and, more importantly, opportunities. And last month, we marked an important milestone when President Biden approved the 10-year plans for these countries and the region and transmitted those plans to Congress. The new approach under the strategy requires that the efforts of the State Department, USAID, and DoD, together with other departments and agencies, are synchronized to achieve long-term strategic goals with our priority partners. And I should say, for the sake of explanation, within the State Department, CSO, the bureau that I lead, has the day-to-day responsibility for this implementation. We are committed to interagency integration of effort here in Washington and in the field. State is overall the lead federal agency for executing the strategy, overseeing and implementing its diplomatic and political efforts, also overseeing planning and implementation of justice sector, law enforcement, and other security sector assistance. USAID serves as a lead implementing agency for international development and non-security assistance, and DoD serves in a supporting role through specialized activities, including security cooperation and civil affairs. To maintain our deepened level of integration in Washington, there's a standing working level interagency secretariat that's been established, together with a high-level prevention and stabilization steering committee. I cannot underscore enough how vital this partnership is to the success of our efforts. We have forged a new path of collaboration across the 3Ds and across the government as a whole. Now, to support our efforts in the field, I should mention that CSO has deployed personnel to posts in priority partner countries. We also have CSO stabilization advisors at AFRICOM, CENTCOM, EUCOM, and INDOPACOM, where they're working together with many other parts of the command to promote coordination around stabilization, around the Global Fragility Act implementation, including with civil affairs planning elements. Back to the 10-year plans. These were developed by U.S. Embassy country teams. So a field-led process, a real innovation, alongside local partners and supported by the DoD combatant commands. Rather than prioritizing short-term gains, the plans have a long-term vision, which we believe signals to our partners that we're committed to looking beyond urgent and near-term needs to focus on strategic goals and interests. The plans are intended to orient, adapt, and guide U.S. efforts in close collaboration with partner countries as they make progress on that long-term journey. The work of overcoming legacies of violence and fostering more peaceful and inclusive societies is deeply challenging and nonlinear, and it will be generational. It often requires structural and incremental changes over a long period, and we are prepared for that, and we are setting expectations around that. Our efforts are collaborative and tailored to the context, the capabilities, and the constraints of each of our partner countries. By taking a locally driven approach, we believe we will better inform how the U.S. can best team with a range of partners in diverse settings to prevent conflict and to build peace. Diplomatic partnerships with local, national, regional, and international actors are central to the strategy's success. Even in developing the plans, we used a highly collaborative process, as I mentioned, emphasizing field leadership, multi-stakeholder consultations, and high-level diplomatic engagement. Our embassies and we here in DC held extensive discussions with hundreds of stakeholders spanning national and regional governments, civil society, multilateral organizations, bilateral partners, experts and practitioners, academics, the private sector, as well as the Congress. Now, although our focus remains on the long term, with regard to the span of the vision of the plans, we're not going to wait 10 years to assess the successes and the lessons learned therein. The new approach in the law requires us to review our strategic impact and adjust our efforts as implementation progresses. We must not only learn the lessons, but we have to apply them. Our intent is to work closely with stakeholders to monitor progress toward our goals, identify best practices for implementation, share our lessons learned. Our posts in each country and region are developing a monitoring, evaluation, and learning system across diplomatic, development, and defense activities and assistance, informed by consultations with stakeholders and the best objective data available, which we will need to gather. The system will be designed to capture changes in the local and external contexts and monitor progress in the plans, and they will be the basis for which we intend to refine, update, and adjust our implementation efforts going forward. Each priority country and region has unique local context that has influenced our efforts. Let me give you a sense of the range of challenges and the approaches that we are undertaking. In the coastal West Africa region, the plan focuses on preventing the expansion of terrorism and violent extremism from neighboring countries into the vulnerable border communities by addressing the root causes of instability. As highlighted by Vice President Harris in her March 27 trip to Ghana, the plan identifies investments in conflict prevention and stabilization efforts and supports African-led initiatives, elevating bilateral and regional approaches to prevent violence and insecurity. It reflects an integrated approach to governance and security in support of African partners by aligning with the plans of national governments, which we looked at in the course of developing our plans. Their plans take a holistic approach to mitigating conflict risks and vulnerabilities, the ones that we're aligned with. The plan focuses on strengthening U.S. engagement in the region to more effectively work with our partners to mitigate risks, bolster resiliencies, strengthen social cohesion, and build a shared vision on prevention. Next month, SOLIC and the Joint Staff will co-sponsor a tabletop exercise with interagency partners to explore the most effective ways to work together on strategy implementation in this region, including as that relates to civil affairs. In Mozambique, the plan supports the national government's plans to promote reconciliation, inclusive and sustainable development, and resilience in historically marginalized and conflict-affected areas, including to counter vulnerabilities to and impacts of terrorism and to address the root causes of instability in the north. The plan emphasizes localized approaches to enable communities, especially youth and women, to set the agenda for active participation in political, economic, and social processes, while also prioritizing institutional capacity building to improve accountability and service delivery and address human rights abuses. Mozambique also provides us a great example of the kind of high-level diplomatic alignment we're pursuing to set strategic conditions for success. So just 2 weeks ago, the UN Security Council, under the presidency of Mozambique, held a series of peace-building events focused on Africa. Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield and Undersecretary Azrizea from the State Department reiterated the need to strengthen U.S. engagement and partnership to advance peace by addressing the root causes of instability on the continent. Third, in Haiti, we are approaching our effort under the strategy with humility about our own capabilities and appreciation of the deep-seated challenges facing that country. The plan seeks to orient and align U.S. efforts over time, sequencing and layering security and development interventions in targeted areas, drawing lessons from Central America. Recognizing the severe insecurity in Haiti today, the plan outlines a vision for the longer term through a targeted approach to foster stabilization in the most severely affected communities. In Libya, the plan outlines a flexible and adaptive approach focused on community-level programs and focuses on a grassroots localized approach to support citizen-responsive democratic local governance. And finally, I just returned from Papua New Guinea, another of our priority countries where I met with a range of officials and stakeholders. There, we plan to build on PNG's longstanding goals of human development, equality and participation, self-reliance, and the equitable management of environmental resources. We will seek to strengthen communities' capacity to respond to chronic violence, support inclusive, sustainable, and equitable economic growth, improve justice systems, and professionalize police and defense forces. Innovatively, the plan focuses on advancing gender equity and equality, preventing and responding to gender-based violence, and elevating women peace builders across all of those efforts I've just named, putting into practice lessons learned from the global women, peace, and security agenda. Now, over time, we hope that lessons learned through our engagements in these places will have broad application in additional countries and regions. As the President has said, the plans represent a meaningful long-term commitment by the United States to build the political and economic resilience of partner societies by making strategic investments in prevention to mitigate the underlying vulnerabilities that can lead to conflict and violence and are critical to achieving lasting peace. The plans are rooted in our commitment to upholding human rights, strengthening democracy and good governance, and amplifying the unsung work of prevention and capacity building, which often reflects, as this audience knows well, the dedication of decades of dialogue and diplomacy and engagement. Each plan emphasizes collaboration and coordination across the US government, between the US government and local and international partners. Now, hold on, I'm going to check one thing here that I want to make sure I emphasize. How does all this relate to DoD's concept of integrated deterrence? So I was giving it a little thought in the context of preparing this talk. And while the strategy is not at all about military deterrence in its emphasis on partnerships and collaboration, the strategy itself demands a form of integration to accomplish the ambitious objectives that it's setting forth. And in that sense, the strategy does echo Secretary Austin's vision of working with partners across domains. Also, I heard ASD Mayor speak earlier today about the way in which GFA may actually be seen as consonant to the concept of integrated deterrence. I might argue, as I've been thinking about this, that what we're attempting with implementation of the strategy could be described as integrated prevention, an interagency approach that relies on engagement and collaboration with international partners. It focuses on approaches that have the effect of preventing incipient conflict at the lowest end of the conflict spectrum, left of boom, as you would say. And we know that our strength and our impact is multiplied when we're working with partners, our friends, our allies. And I have to underscore, although I've said it briefly in this talk already, that civil society has and will continue to play a pivotal role in guiding our efforts and refining them over time. So some would say a whole of society approach. One could argue that integrated prevention is reflected in the 3D triad that I earlier described, working together or in complement. We have the ability to engage in a flexible array of programming and activities that could include flexible security assistance, diplomatic engagement, development capabilities in any one of the number of the areas that our plans target. The Army Special Operations Enterprise in general and the civil affairs community, both active and reserve, are key military partners in this effort. You are often the most likely US military partners to be involved in our areas of interest. Even other US forces we might work with rely on the training and the doctrine your schoolhouse develops. We particularly need civil affairs in this integrated prevention approach, or you might say integrated deterrence, because our challenges in stabilization require the political and cultural skills that you bring. We need civil affairs teams with the skills you call civil assessment, key leader engagement, which is in fact a form of diplomacy. We need civil affairs personnel, active and reserve, so proficient in these core skills that ambassadors can rely on them, as extensions of their political sections for those places civilians simply cannot get to safely. We depend on you for ground truth when we cannot get it ourselves, the State Department, and we need to understand each other's doctrine, strategies, and our own planning and operations. Learning requires obtaining and organizing information, and to this end, the CSO Bureau is already working closely with USASOC and USACAPOC on something called CASTLE, the Civil Affairs Science and Technology Learning Ecosystem. It's one example of our cooperation. CASTLE, for those of you who may not be familiar, is being developed to provide the civil affairs enterprise with the social and data science tools and approaches necessary to better understand and incorporate the information we have on any given region. If we get it right, CASTLE will allow us to better task information collection needs to teams in the field, organize that information in ways best suited to shaping policy, and then push supplementary information back to those teams to shape next steps. The CASTLE team recently wrapped up an operational proof of principle in Ghana, bringing together state, NGA, OSD, the 352nd Civil Affairs Command, and the 91st Civil Affairs Battalion. The collaboration proved that we can work together under the GFA toward our joint mission of stabilization. We understand that the CASTLE initiative will be expanding to cover all the relevant GCCs. We're very excited at the thought of what this could do for our entire community of practice. We also know that there are a number of places civilians cannot get to, places that are non-permissive. While there are many factors that affect decisions on where civilians can travel, we want to make sure our stabilization experts have an expeditionary mindset, and where they may be permitted to travel are able to operate with you if and when that's in environments, if and when that's where we need to engage. So as we meet, a CSO officer is at Fort Bragg participating in the qualification course Tiller exercise. He's learning how you operate in the field, while your future civil affairs soldiers are learning how to work with the interagency and what we can bring to the table. We hope to standardize this kind of training as part of our strategy for institutional change. So to quote President Biden again, prevention is hard work measured not in days and weeks, but in years and generations. Its successes are never as evident as its failures, and it requires us to remain focused on lasting peace and stability over the allure of easier, more temporary gains that may not strengthen our position in the long term. Effectively implementing the US strategy to prevent conflict and promote stability will depend on the capabilities we develop, our cooperation, our ability to apply lessons learned over the past decades and into the future. We are setting the foundation for our success now. It will depend deeply on how well we work together. We build that cooperation and collaboration to make it even tighter than it is today, one could say, in an integrated prevention context. We know civil affairs will continue to support that close civil military tie across the board, from doctrine development to training and education to your teams in the field. I thank you very much for your time, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you very
much,
Secretary Witkowsky.
Dan, are you able to?
Yes, can you hear me? What about now?
Dan, you're good. 5 by 5.
Okay, sounds good. All right, so the first question comes from Besser Rayleigh. Can you unmute and ask your question?
Thank you very much, Honorable Madam Assistant Secretary. My question is, Russia has been very helpful in obviously opening the path for Sweden and Finland to wish to join NATO, and Finland having joined. Now, there has been a lot of countries who were resisting, but what has been some of the pleasant surprises in means of conflict and stabilization operations? Perhaps countries who were shy or unwilling, who have decided to join the free world or the rule-based order. Thank you.
Sorry, I don't think I understood the question.
My question focuses on more on what has been some of the pleasant surprises in your field in the past 6 months in means of cooperation and collaboration partnerships, perhaps countries that were somehow neutral or unwilling in support of operations of the rule-based order. Over.
Right. Well, I mean, I think we can take our coalition effort in Ukraine as a good example, and the cohesiveness of the NATO alliance in addressing Russia's unprovoked aggression is a perfect example. I don't know if I could say it was a surprise, but I can point to it as a fine example. And now, just a few days ago, right, Finland is now the 31st member of the NATO alliance, and we have Sweden waiting. So I don't know. I think if any of us had dialed back a year and a half ago, I'm not sure we would have predicted where we necessarily are today. I would say in the context of the work that I'm doing right now, that I'm really focused on the Global Fragility Act, we do find our partnerships as very important. And in spite of a lot of the tugs and pulls of other requirements around the world, in some of these fragile environments, we still find among our friends and allies some very willing and helpful partners. And I think I could say that in any one of the places that I've laid out for you today. I don't think that any of that comes just because. I think it comes when we work at it, when we are out there, when we're cooperating and collaborating with our friends and allies. And I think that is true on the diplomatic side. It's just as true on the defense side. It's true through our development experts as well. I think it takes a whole of government approach to build those strong relationships. Over.
Thank you very much.
Okay, what other questions we have out there?
This is Chris Holshek. I was typing my question for Assistant Secretary Witkowsky, and ma'am, I just would wonder if where you sit, what is your advice to civil affairs practitioners on how we can go to school on being able to better work with you, not only from the Washington perspective, but from particularly at the U.S. Embassy level and in country? What documents should we be looking at so we can better understand your MO and the policies that drive what you folks do at CSO?
Well, Chris, thank you. I'm very humbled by that question, because the civil affairs community is so sophisticated and working with a range of players. I think as in the past, I'd answer that in a couple of different ways. One, all the basic documents that guide our civilian national security strategies and plans. So the national security strategy, which has a lot in it, but I will tell you, if like we are, one has a mention in the national security strategy. One absolutely looks to the strategy, and in fact, the Global Fragility Act, among many other issues, are identified there. For us, I've just mentioned the U.S. strategy to prevent conflict and promote stability. But much more than that, I think the personal relationships are what's important. Ensuring that the ambassadors understand what it is that you bring to the table, because without the ambassador support, we can't get you where you need to go. And I just want to reiterate how important, from our standpoint, the partnership is going to be in implementing the Global Fragility Act between us, civil affairs, in going forward, precisely for the reasons that I mentioned, because you can be in places we cannot be. And in all of the countries that I mentioned, and I focused on, I think in my talk on coastal West Africa, there's a whole band in those countries where civilians are not able to be present at the moment. So you have civil affairs, a very important role to play in terms of building relationships, in terms of understanding what's going on in those places. You are important eyes and ears and builder of relationships. And I think ASD Mayor talked about in his remarks how valuable even a very small persistent presence can be. And I just want to echo that. Over.
If I could just follow up real quick, I'm particularly concerned that, I mean, we're all looking at Ukraine now and China and Taiwan, but I'm particularly concerned about the fact that we and our allies are getting outflanked in Latin America and in Africa by the Chinese. And I just wonder, what kinds of things can we do better? You know, we have CA obviously that's regionally aligned, Southcom and UCOM, AFRICOM. What I'm particularly thinking about, what is it that we can do better so that we can kind of counter the narratives and influence that the Chinese in particular are perpetuating in those regions?
Yeah, I think you raise a really good point, and I'm probably, at least at this exact moment, somewhat more familiar with Africa than other parts of Latin America. Of course, Haiti's been oriented toward Taiwan, but in Africa, I would say, our presence is so important, and we're in that's a resource constrained environment. In Africa for the U.S. military and for AFRICOM. So I think very capably, strategically focused deployments that demonstrate a presence are very important. I also, frankly, would like to see under the Global Fragility Act and the U.S. strategy a step up in our security cooperation in those areas. I'd like to see it for its own sake. I would also say that if we're more present, if we're more present as a partner, we give a country in which we are present a choice. They can choose us, and in order for that to happen, we need to be able to have something on offer. So that I think by shining a light on the importance of prevention, which of course saves lives and ultimately can save resources, we will also be able to bring a few more resources to the table now, and it will have a beneficial corollary effect to the question that you posed. I think this is something that we all need to understand and appreciate. But I would also say this is not the driver of what we're doing in these countries. This being strategic competition. The driver is, as I mentioned, how can we help our partners prevent, in the case of Coastal West Africa, prevent the spread of violent extremism, and help them to become more resilient and more peaceful nations. And I would say the same thing is true of Mozambique up there in the north. We have an opportunity to move out on reconstruction and recovery, and this is an important moment there for us as well. Over.
Thank you. Next question is from John at Eunomia Journal. John, go ahead and ask your question.
Sir, thank you, ma'am. Thanks for your time. John McElligott, I'm a captain in the Army Reserve. And my question is for you, given the countries we've identified just about a year ago, these priority countries in region in West Africa and ECOWAS countries, in the reports you've read and seen from the field and what the CSO perspective is, do you think that CAA forces would be better served by going deeper into regional analysis or diving deeper into language preparation? You know, I'm wondering, what are the skills specifically that you think would be added value to the team in that approach? Or, you know, given the deep bench that we have, incredibly deep, whether it's civilian military experience or tying with industry and business, what are some, either in general or specific ideas that you have where we could add value in what we do?
Right. So again, I'm humbled by that question because I think CAA brings so much to the table, whether it's language skills, which in many places requires French, right? Or whether it's an understanding of the external environment, private sector, whether it's an understanding of farmer-herder conflict, whether it's an understanding of groups like the pool who are traditionally marginalized, climate change, how that's having effect on migration. I mean, there's so many pieces, I think, that really affect or can affect the likelihood of exacerbation of conflict or violence, or the ability of an FTO to recruit, especially up there in the north. So, I don't know what to tell you. It's all of the above. I also think, though, that again, as I have mentioned in my remarks, working very closely with the State Department, with our USAID partners, working together is really very much a force multiplier and something that we hope to continue to deepen. When we're able to really focus, it's interesting, really focus in on one, in this case, it is a set of countries, but one region with a very focused objective. It really helps us to build that kind of deeper cooperation, that understanding. And I would say, from all my years in government, never underestimate the lack of understanding among, across these cultures, and the need to continually relearn and educate one another about who we are, how we talk, what our language is, how to ask for something. I mean, have you ever noticed when a civilian asks, DOD for something? Sometimes the ask is very specific. I want a thing. I wanted this. I wanted that. And you want to come back to me and say, well, tell me what your requirements are, and I'll tell you what it is that we need to bring to the table. So there's a lot of that continues to go on. But I hope that through this effort, we'll be able to deepen our engagement, develop that proof of concept, and then have it last. You know, there are lots of deep relationships that have been developed over the years, but then they dissipate. And the purpose of this is to develop those relationships and then to create some lessons learned that we can use over time. And we're committed to that.
Thank you, ma'am.
Mhm.
The next question is from Jeff Richter. Jeff, go ahead and ask the question.
Yes, Assistant Secretary Witkowsky. I'm wondering if when you were developing your plan for Haiti, you involved the Haitian American community.
Yes, we conducted extensive consultations in the case of Haiti. I did not personally do it. I have a team of folks, an interagency team of folks who did. There are more than 300 stakeholders who were consulted in the course of developing the plan. And as we speak, over the last day or two, we've gone back out to them to continue those conversations. They've been very, very engaging. And I think what you mean is the Haitian American community here, the diaspora community, which is one of many, many stakeholder communities that we felt it was really important to engage and to listen to. Some of the challenge with Haiti, of course, is that there's so many immediate challenges right now. And that's really where everybody's focused. The advantage of what we think we're bringing to this is to be able to look out a little bit over the longer term, over the immediate security crisis, and to think of, not only to think about, but to bring some programming to bear that is not only about building up, in this case, the Haitian National Police, which has been the focus of the American effort and international effort in Haiti, but also to bring around it some focused attention and resourcing to the local communities, to the civilian piece, to help to build out violence prevention, even as we're working on the core security law enforcement matters.
Thank you.
That answer your question? Yeah, over. And if there's anyone who you know who we haven't spoken with, you feel free to send them our way. We're all about the consultations.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Yeah, Secretary, the next question is from Marcus O at PKSOI. Go ahead, Marcus.
Hi, Marcus.
Hi, how you doing?
Good.
This is Colonel Snow with PKSOI. I'm also a reserve officer in the Civil Affairs branch. At PKSOI, we've been doing some work on the impacts. It started with Ukraine, the impact, the food crisis we had last summer. And then, of course, the biggest impacts, sadly, more people will probably suffer in Africa from the war in Ukraine than elsewhere than in Ukraine. And so it occurred that we looked into it, the supply chain, right? The fragility of the supply chain. And we had looked at, some of the security cooperation activities that were happening were in fact helping reduce food shipment cost by reducing risks. And one of the ones that we looked at was Gulf of Guinea. There's some AFRICOM does a number of exercises, but it wasn't specifically a way to reduce the cost of food shipments, right? Reducing the risk, making the Lloyd's of London shipment cheaper and such. And it occurred to us that security cooperation has a significant, there's a pretty big role that they could have in specifically addressing food insecurity by sort of reducing the cost of shipment and that supply chain. By risk reduction, by a variety of mechanisms. So I was kind of wondering your thoughts on the subject, or if that had been kind of something that had come up, like anti-piracy, for it, is a classic example of that.
Right. I mean, anti-piracy, of course, is an ongoing component of U.S. policy, but I personally have not looked at this particular issue, and I think it's a really good example of how we need to look at risk reduction in a very broad and holistic way. And if you've got a report, I used to be, get on your website a lot, and when I had more time to read, we would love to see the results of your work. And I'll say to you, and I'll say to others on this line, one of the innovations, one of the innovative approaches that we're seeking to systematize in the implementation of the law and the implementation of the strategy is a really consultative approach, because we don't have many of the answers right here sitting in this relatively small office in the State Department. We need to be partnering with all of you. So please send us your way. And I imagine you are in touch with some of my team members, and if you're not, then we'll get you reconnected. I know you all come here from time to time. So please, let's be in the conversation together.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, Hayden Bassett, are you available to ask your question about SMEs?
Yes, sir. Thank you, ma'am. Hayden Bassett, Captain Hayden Bassett, 352nd Civil Affairs Command. I'm a 38 Golf 6 Victor. In CSO's Conflict Observatory, you've placed SMEs in positions to conduct civil reconnaissance remotely in Ukraine, largely in order to identify the civil implications of the invasion. And so my question is, as Civil Affairs develops the 38 Golf program with similar goals, do you have any lessons learned for the value of integrating SMEs from different civil sectors into your operations?
Okay, so unless there's something I don't know, which is always possible, the Conflict Observatory, for those of you who may not, thank you for asking about the Conflict Observatory, and thank you for asking a question. The Conflict Observatory operates remotely. It is a platform that utilizes commercially available satellite data imagery, other types of data like social media, and other information that the platform has access to. It aggregates that information and geolocates the information, and then it produces reports that help to highlight and document alleged Russian atrocities in Ukraine to a standard that can be used in international courts in the context of international investigative mechanisms. So we set that mechanism up last May, gosh, almost a year ago, precisely because we understood that we were not going to have the kind of access on the ground that we really wanted to have in order to conduct some of this documentation. So this is an innovation born of a lot of different kinds of experiences that those of us in CSO have had, and in particular, the person who runs the program was able to bring together a lot of different technologies and skills and concepts to create this innovation. And the advantage of it is, again, this isn't to your question, but for those of you who are listening, this information is publicly available. Anybody can access it. It is on an open website. So it has the benefit of shining a light on the atrocities, or the alleged atrocities Russia has committed, including the abduction of children, including its filtration clamps, including its destruction, to the last question, of grain storage silos or damage to them. And then the reports are designed so they can be used by investigative mechanisms. I'm not sure what that question is. So in terms of people on the ground, we are not now triangulating with information on the ground, but in another context, and I don't know that we have any plans for that, but in another context, we could. And I hope that we'll be able to take the tool that we've developed for this purpose and find a way to use it in other contexts as well. I think it's very innovative for those of you who who spend any time, as I have, for example, on arms control. We used to get all this information on a classified basis. It wasn't really very shareable. This way, it's out there for everyone to see and to reinforce what we know and to put out there sometimes new information new information for anyone to be able to read. But we'd be happy to carry on that conversation with you about triangulating on the ground if you're interested, with the folks that are here. Over.
Thank you, Secretary. Hugh Van Roosen, you had a question?
Thanks very much. Go back and read my question again. So it was just to give a synopsis of it. I was curious about any best practices that you've observed in working with the military as partners. As an example, CA teams that have been assigned to embassies, joint planning efforts that have gone on. I've watched these over the years, but I'm curious what your observations of those, and if there are any other best practices, things that have worked well and things that perhaps have not worked so well that you could enlighten us on. Thanks very much.
Oh, well, you're perfect to ask this question. You embody working together across cultural lines, and I appreciate your asking the question. So my experience is basically here in Washington. I don't have a lot of the tactical experience in the field, so I'll answer it from that perspective. And I think the best practices are the best practices. The best practices are the best practices that the civil affairs team has, which are, go out there, listen, know your cultures, and build your bridges carefully. Listen to what other folks have to say, learn their language, and look for ways to bring a particular asset, a particular niche, particular capability to the table that can really help advance the ball. I think civil affairs teams are uniquely positioned to be able to do that. Civilians really appreciate civil affairs teams. I can't think of any example. Again, most of my experience is in Washington, but I can't think of any example where someone would say, oh, I don't know about having that civil affairs team here, because the civil affairs teams know you should always check in with the ambassadors, run the traps, and understand the process. Also understand where their particular value add. And in so many places in the field, there's just not enough of you. I mean, that's really the bigger challenge rather than the other way around.
Great. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Secretary, our final question is from Chris Stockel. Chris?
Hi, Ann. Great to see you. Thank you very much.
Hi.
Hey, so given your time at SHA, any comments on what you would have considered or approached differently, given the fact that DoD is so heavily resourced and the other two Ds in the triad may not be as resourced as folks would like?
What I would approach differently there, or what I would be doing differently here?
However you want to approach it. I just feel DoD is pretty heavily resourced. I think Secretary Gates had said, hey, send me some of your foreign service officers and I'll send you a major, a lieutenant colonel. We have to go to school more frequently. We have to train together. We have to deploy. And it happened in Iraq and Afghanistan. It's starting to dwindle now. I'd like to think, especially given the time that I was over at Navy Hill for 18 months, I speak a few languages, but one of them is state with a little bit of defense and English sprinkled in. So any way you want to approach it on comments about the 3Ds, your time at SHA, and now CSO.
Okay, well, that's great. Well, I would say, I think of the two languages, the state is definitely the tougher language. It has multiple layers to it. It is the language of diplomacy. And so if you've learned to speak the language of state, you can probably speak any language. I'm still learning myself. I would say, look, when I was in CSO and I was working in particular, of course, I worked on stabilization, but I also worked on peacekeeping operations. And in both of those contexts, and in specifically in the peacekeeping operations context in particular, we sought to bring more assets to the table, because when we were able to do that, we could see that it was an incentive for other countries to do more as well in the context of peacekeeping operations. And And that is a great return on investment for us. But I think it was true then, and I think it's even more true now. The space that we are in, stabilization, in the civil affairs space, is never as well resourced as other parts of the department. So while the department is much, much better resourced than the State Department, in this particular part of the department, I wish that, I wish then and I wish now that there were more resources. That's the first thing. The second thing is there are a number of aspects of the DoD culture that I really appreciate, and I wish that we could do more to bring more officers over to the State Department. There are a number of them, but I wish there were more. We do have a very fine officer here who's going to rotate out, and we'll have another one here shortly. And we have a number of retired military as well who bring their talents to the Bureau. But the ability to plan, to look ahead, to think methodically, to organize, is a skill set that is just so deeply ingrained in DoD office, in military officers, and is it is not in such a long supply here at the department. On the other hand, the department, brings other skill sets to the table. And I think marrying those pieces more effectively and more readily with more resources could really bring significant benefit to us. And you mentioned, collaboration in the field, especially in the wars of past years in Afghanistan and Iraq. And we're not deploying together like that anymore for good reason. But I hope that in other ways we can maintain that ability to collaborate and cooperate and do better at the strategic level, at the Washington level, to reinforce a strategic approach, a collaborative approach, an effective approach, a focused approach in the field. So I guess those are the things I wish for. If you know anyone who wants to come over on rotation to CSO, give me a shout. Over.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Do you have any closing comments that you'd like to make?
Yeah, I really appreciate this opportunity. I think my closing comments are going to be a little bit along the lines of what ASD Mayor said. I wouldn't say winning without fighting, because that's not what we say at the Department of State. But what I would say is, I think this community, the one that I'm speaking to, really understands the value of building relationships, of forward presence, of deploying in ways that can help to reinforce our ability to prevent violence, to prevent conflict, to interrupt cycles of instability. And we need your voices. We need your community. It is, as you know, sometimes very difficult for the U.S. government, for us, to do much more than focus on the crisis du jour. I think we do have an opportunity, a requirement under the Global Fragility Act, to do more, to do better, to look over the horizon, to invest in prevention. You all understand that. And I hope that you can, some of you on this line can come with us, whether you're academics and you're writing about this now, or you're teaching, or maybe some of you are still active and might be in the field, that you can come with us and help us to make this innovative effort a big success.
Thank you so much for joining us today for the roundtable. Really appreciate your comments. I apologize for the technical difficulties early on, but thank you very much. I think we'll then turn it on over to I think Chris Holschick.
Well, okay. And as expected, Assistant Secretary Witkowsky, you never disappoint, and thank you so much for your service, for what you do on both sides of the river, and trying to bring those two disparate communities together. I'm not sure if I interpreted your last remarks correctly, but if you've got post announcements over at CSO and you want more guys with CA backgrounds, we at the association will be very happy to help get the word out that you may be looking for people with some of those skill sets to kind of offset and balance out, but yet still understand how to integrate and do the civil military integration piece. So if you have any job or announcements of any sorts and you want to see gay people get more involved in that, we'll be happy to spread the word.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I think I was hoping that you might have an opportunity to come over here on rotation, but if I also have job openings, I will definitely let you know. And I should really say, it's an incredible honor to be here. My thanks is to you and your community and what you do for everything that you bring to our national security. It is really, I've had the opportunity to work with the civil affairs community now, as I said, for a number of years. And so I'm fan number one and really have a deep appreciation for what you all bring. Sometimes not as well understood, not as well highlighted as it should be, but I mean that in the most heartfelt way. So thanks again for letting me join you for a little bit today. And I'm happy to follow up with anyone who wants to continue the conversation in a different context. Thank you.
Thank you, Assistant Secretary Witkowsky, again, for gracing us your presence here today and enlightening us. We always learn a lot, and having you come back sometime to continue the conversation. So with that, I'm going to now turn the floor over to Chris Stockel. And Chris is going to bring our panel of academic researchers on the issues of irregular warfare and cyber warfare. Very, very qualified, associated with West Point.
Got it. Hey, thanks, Chris.
Get that understanding. Go ahead, Chris, over to you.
All right, thanks. Hey, I'm going to recommend a quick combo check with my two panelists and then a 2 to 3 minute break. And then I don't know if it's the Eunomia journal or my computer or whatever, but my camera goes in and then comes out. But that's not really that important as long as the audio is here. So Karen and Stanislava, if you would just, I see Stanislava right there. Karen, if you would either come up on the mic and or camera, that would be great. Stanislava, how's your microphone?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
100%, 5 by 5, like we say. Karen?
Yes, how about that?
Perfect, 5 by 5. So let's.
I have a question for you, Chris.
Yes,
is my logo reading correctly? Because sometimes it flips.
No, it is. So perfectly, Army
I'll
Cyber
be happy
Institute.
then. That's great.
Fantastic. Thanks. All right, so let's just take a 2-minute break and we'll gather right back here and we'll start at about 1 or 2 minutes after the hour. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
right, team, the 10-second warning here. Again, I apologize for the picture. Probably better for everyone, but it's okay. And Karen, are you back up on the net? Perfect. Thank you so much. So again, I apologize. Hey, so my name's Chris Stockel. I'm going to lead the panel here on what we're calling integrated deterrence, irregular warfare, cyber warfare, and civil affairs. And I am joined by two fantastic individuals, Stanislava work with me on this last name, Mladenova.
Mladenova, yes, very well.
Mladenova. Thank you, close. I apologize. And Karen Gutierrez. So Stanislava is a Ph.D., Brown University Center for Human Rights and Humanitarian Studies, and also a fellow at the United States Military Academy. And Karen's a Ph.D. research analyst at the Army Cyber Institute and associate professor at Department of Social Sciences at West Point also. And as I said earlier, my name's Chris Stockel. My last two commands were the command of the 351 Civil Affairs Command in Mountain View, California, with responsibilities and or advice for civil affairs within Indo-PACOM. And before that, I was the Deputy Commanding General at USACAPOC at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. So thank you both for that. There's a lot going on, whether we call it integrated deterrence or regular warfare. Integrated deterrence, the strategy for the Department of Defense, which involves creating, combining the strengths across domains, theaters, the instruments of national power, allies, partners to deter aggression, irregular warfare, a violent struggle among state and non-state actors for legitimacy and influence over relevant populations. So we're joined here with two experts that are going to talk us through some of their experiences. They'll speak 5, 10, 12 minutes, 10 or 12 minutes each. Then I'll ask them a question or three. Then we'll open it up for a Q&A. So I would ask that the audience start thinking about their questions. It's never too early to type, but maybe give our fantastic speakers a few minutes to comment on their experiences, and then we can really have a great conversation for the second half. So Stanislava, over to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. You can hear me okay still?
Perfect.
Perfect. All right. Just give me a second. All right. So thanks so much. I think one of the downsides of being sort of in the later part of the days, it's so much incredible discussion has already taken place. And what I'd like to do is pick up on some of the themes that have been mentioned and hopefully get us to think about them from a different angle. I certainly from the civilian and the research angle that I've been examining in the last couple of years. And the first thing I want to do is to remind us of the relationship of the interagency in the last couple of decades and essentially what has happened in the civil military domain, in the interagency domain. A lot of these discussions are not new. We have lots to draw on, as already has been mentioned by previous speakers. So just to frame it a little bit, Assistant Secretary of Defense Mayer talked about a thought out and enhanced integration of civil affairs across the interagency. And he particularly mentioned the humanitarian and development world. And Assistant Secretary Witkowsky also spoke about the lessons in Iraq and Afghanistan. And, a lot of these are around about the U.S. military in general, how it found itself in a non-traditional role of a development and humanitarian actor in Iraq and Afghanistan, which is can be kind of a sticky topic. We have drawn a lot of lessons from those wars, but we did see multiple branches of the military kind of working as essentially doing the job of what USAID would be doing or what a humanitarian actor would be doing. And yet the wars are over now, and we need to look forward and sort of move past the lessons, draw on the lessons we've learned and move past that. But DoD still has a very strong role in these spaces. This is something that I certainly looked upon in my research. And it carries out development projects. It has a whole budget line. It does it on a small scale. And it's usually civil affairs that get involved in this space. Oftentimes it's for security objectives, but oftentimes also it does actually do some good to the population, which we know. And we talk about irregular warfare. I do want to bring us back to this term, because irregular warfare somehow always implies a mix of tools that we use, but does not necessarily talk about the terrain. And essentially, it's something that's not regular, it's shifting, it's changing, and it does not stay to one mission. It's kind of cross-cutting. You can see it in peacekeeping, you can see it in disaster response, you can see it in complex emergencies, or when I say disaster response, I mean those that can turn into a complex emergency. You see it in FID, training in counterterrorism, counter-narcotics. Essentially, irregular engagement is part of every one of these missions, and civil affairs is involved in every one of these missions. And DoD has been doing it for certainly for the time that I've been studying the space over the last couple of decades. The other thing that's been happening a lot, and this is definitely a shift and something that's drawing us closer together, is donors have dramatically scaled up their presence and programming in fragile states. And this is something that's been at the forefront of our discussions earlier. Development, just to kind of take us back, development used to be thought of as an activity which occurred in apolitical contexts, and military involvement, only related to contexts where actual conflict was occurring. So you had these two extremes of, you need the right conditions to do development. You kind of need the right triggers to do the sort of the conflict and security stuff. That is rarely the case anymore. These contexts rarely exist. They really have definitely become the exception and not the rule. And again, 20 years ago, very little aid was going to fragile states. Now the predominant part of public donor aid is going to these contexts. The other thing that has occurred, again, drawing us together into these spaces, and particularly in the irregular warfare space, is that conflict has completely lost its linearity. And I know I'm preaching to the choir when I say this, but there actually did used to be, and to some extent, people still agreed kind of to the 5 notional phases of conflict. But we really are these days dealing much more with contexts where it's kind of what General Krohley described as the 3-block war. You are doing war fighting, humanitarian assistance, and patrolling the streets all in the same day, and you're essentially serving as this actor. And who else can be in this space but civil affairs? And I would argue that that's kind of the genesis of much of the CA's craft, and certainly the genesis of irregular warfare. So what are we to do? I've kind of laid out a couple of points of the lay of the land at the moment, and what are we to do going forward in this space? What's our responsibility? And I would like to offer several recommendations based on what has been said and based on kind of our own thinking at the individual and the institutional level. And the first one is that I would say that there absolutely is a need to re-energize the conversation about the interagency, and particularly about civil-military interaction. And the Global Fragility Act, very naturally, as we have seen from this morning, the idea is to tackle sources of insecurity. But the Global Fragility Act is also kind of a pinnacle for almost a litmus test to the interagency. It's not just about tackling sources of insecurity, it's drawing on all of the instruments available, and how can we better align diplomatic development and security efforts. And again, we talk about global fragility. We've talked about Ukraine a little bit, and I'm not in any way suggesting that that's something we need to ignore, but it's certainly in terms of the civil-military relationship for Ukraine, a lot of the thinking is around kind of a Marshall Plan-esque context. What happens when the guns stop shooting? What do we do? How do we go? How do we rebuild? And the fragility space, as we have discussed, is much more of a simultaneous long-term thing. The second recommendation is that, and I've seen it in discussions and people's questions, is to recognize that at the policy, operational, tactical levels, the reality of the interagency looks very different. And that not everything that makes good policy sense makes good tactical sense. Or that, organizational structures may have a very strong kind of accountability purpose at the headquarters level, but at the tactical level, you need agile instruments. You need to be able to act quickly, adapt quickly, decide quickly, and kind of, really react to whatever is occurring at that particular moment in time. And again, the Global Fragility Act is very much a pinnacle for that because it calls for, much of the removing of the bureaucratic and organizational constraints that exist within the interagency, like, sector-specific earmarks at the country level. And so I would say, again, a Global Fragility Act, low-intensity conflict, it truly is a turn. But I think for the most part, we will all agree that we cannot think critically about security without thinking about poverty or thinking about disease, disease spreading and, a large population suffering from disease. Just now, a few blocks away from where I'm sitting, the World Bank and the IMF spring meetings are taking place, and the main topics are debt crises, post-pandemic recovery, climate crises. All of these have implications for security, and essentially effective deterrence is a consultative approach to the process. We must talk to stakeholders outside of our own area of operation. I would also say that it's the global fragility discussion is an opportunity for innovation. And I believe Secretary Witkowsky touched upon this. And I would kind of extrapolate from that point and say that we really should not be thinking of it as an outcome, but or a means to an end. It's essentially, we have to think about what to do with the resources available to us today. USAID is having difficulty recruiting. The military fell short 25% of its recruitment goal for last year. So this is not just about, trying to find better funding or better structures. It's also working with what we currently have now. And some of the suggestions, Assistant Secretary Witkowsky mentioned it. I looked at a lot of this in a piece of research on how retired military veterans can actually facilitate a better relationship with civic actors because of the civil affairs piece. So there's so much strength there to play upon and work with. And I would say the last point is that Congress, I believe, is allocating, from the numbers I came across, about $200 million a year for the 10-year stabilization plans that were mentioned earlier, and $130 million for 2023. So there does need to be some evidence that the interagency can work together, and any cross-cutting thematic work and bringing closer together these parties is essentially going to be a test to whether this can work. And it's not going to be, crisis, boom and blast. It's long term. 10 years is a generation to be working on these efforts. So I do think of it as the next generation of the interagency. The things that they're going to be looking for is monitoring, evaluation, and learning, something that has traditionally been on the sort of a big point for development actors, and something that we know can be difficult for the military. But my recommendation would be that, we tend to have a sort of a strong obsession with numbers and measurement. And a lot of this work, it's soft work, it's relationship building, it's building allies, it's having, having conversations, staying in the conversation, not breaking up, coming back together. So we need to be open to new methods for measuring our success, which we're not used to before. So it's not like, measuring how many partner troops we trained or how many weapons we contributed. This is more about how many relationships are actually healthy with our partner on the ground, and what does this mean for the larger efforts? So a lot of this is, and I'll kind of stop here because I think I'm close to time. A lot of the analysis around this is not so much about trying to find answers, but asking questions in a different way. The sorts of questions that I would think about is not simply, oh, do we have enough aid to pay for social services and for humanitarian needs? We're now kind of in a metaverse of civil military engagement. So the questions I would be asking to kind of step out of one zone as a way to have a more integrative approach with others in the interagency is, how does training a security force have implication for a country's economy? What does the provision of additional social services or longer life expectancy mean for the security sector of that country, or for
So, Stanislava, you like your last minute just dropped. So, at least on my end, I don't know if anybody else got a frozen screen.
Information overload.
Yeah. Okay. So
Same here.
sorry, I'm happy to go back and reiterate, or I can just hold off and then we can.
So I'll hit you. I'll come back to you during my portion. We'll let Karen do her intro, and it kind of left off with the soft work, and you were just talking about what does some of the implications mean when a security force is trained for local economy, that type of stuff, just to give you an idea where it cut off for me. So Karen, over to you for 10, 12 approximate minutes, opening comments. Then I'll ask a question or three, and then hopefully the audience will start trickling with some questions there. If not, I have an entire page. Thanks. Karen, over to you.
Sure, I loved what Stanislava was saying, so we'll talk again. It's super honor to be here. Obviously, this discussion has been amazingly sophisticated, enlightening, and so I want to manage expectations about my contribution or intervention here. I'm recently returned to the Army, working with the Army. Super excited about that. I spent some years working for the United States Air Force. And it's interesting because, I was Dean of the Air Force Cyber College, working on information warfare issues, and coming back to the Army and looking at information advantage. My first thought was, how interesting is it, the Air Force kind of dropped its idea of information superiority, saying this was, a bridge too far. So we're going to build this concept of information warfare. And I think the Army's information advantage idea of, having the initiative is very significant, and something that I think the civil affairs needs to really think about how it can create the conditions for this initiative. But it's about actor behavior, right? Getting into the decision process, the situational understanding of the actor. And for the Air Force, information warfare is this broad concept that merges a number of disciplines. Often you see the 2 and the 6 together because it's intelligence and cyber, but it's also electronic warfare, electromagnetic spectrum operations. It's information operations, and that's where these come together with the influence, right? With the information operations, and sometimes they'll add public affairs and weather, and just have to think about that last one. So the idea here of looking at these different approaches to what is an integrated environment for integrated deterrence, I think is important for civil affairs, because I'm going to argue that the information communication technologies and our digital life has so driven some changes in the operating environment that we're going to see different kinds of civilian vulnerabilities. And I think we're also seeing, because of increased civil military interdependencies that also come with this, these will translate to military vulnerabilities. So we need to think as civil affairs, I guess my argument will be about not just foreign internal defense, but unfortunately more and more about defense support to civil authorities, which is not necessarily as clear as it could be in the national defense strategy, how that line is drawn between the civilian and the military there in that worst case scenario where the military is actually in the lead. So that's my argument. I'm previewing, and I forgot to hit my timer. I don't know how much I've used yet. I'll try to be quick with the rest of it. I want to lay it out in two parts. The first part is about the strategic environment, and that's that theme that we have: integrated deterrence, irregular warfare, cyber warfare, all these things meshed together. And the second part is civil affairs. So let's talk about the strategic environment. The environment absolutely is contested today. I'm going to argue that. And I would say the gray zone is obviously active. We have a holistic approach required because of the activities we see by Russia and China both, as well as non-state actors. But we have what many are calling an ongoing cyber warfare already hot. And that's something we have to think about very seriously, that we have cases of civil infrastructure that's been penetrated. And as General Hawk, former commander of the 16th Air Force, said, the adversary has engaged the American civilian population in the information environment. So the question I would ask, and not representative of Cyber Institute or Army or DoD, is integrated deterrence really solving this problem for us? Is it something new? Is it just flexible response in another guise? Or is deterrence even still valid as the primary concept for us to cling to? Because it's certainly something that throughout the Cold War was very important to us, and it involves we're going to have tremendous military might, and it also means we're going to win without fighting. So yeah, sure, you love deterrence. There's also that argument, as I just laid out, that it's already failed, right? That this environment is already contested and active. And so I think that's part of the reality. And certainly the American cyber strategy is defend forward. And what is defend forward? Defend forward means that you've got to be active in their systems, right? This is all the public domain discussion about how cyber warfare is practiced. You have to actually be present in the systems in order to execute an exploit. So you could argue that is actually a case of, we're going to say the best defense is a good offense, right? If you think about how that is perceived. So this is all going on at the same time. We have discussion about a prospect of a major war, and we have 4-star general officers talking, openly about, concern that may start as soon as 2025, which last I checked is not far away. And meanwhile, we have, Russia already taking territory in Europe, threatening nuclear weapons use. China certainly has its eye on Taiwan, and what's in Taiwan? Chips, right? For the computers, for all the things that make our life go today. And so this is happening. And then third, there is, in addition to the irregular war and the major war prospect, we've got climate change and its connection to population movement and all the things that Stanislav's talking about as so important in the human dimension of what the civil affairs are doing. So increasingly now, civil affairs is talked about in doctrine. It's interesting because I've read every doctrine I think has ever come out about civil affairs as an information force, right? And that's really become much more prominent than we'd seen in the past. And I think that it's an information force for much more than we're going to track the migrant populations and handle the refugees and keep track of who's who using digital stuff. The cyber civil affairs interface is much more serious than that in civil affairs as an information force. I think it's very important in the resilience side, which is not just withstand, but it's also recover quickly from disruption, which we're going to have to do, not just forward in places where we would prefer the fight happen, but also realistically, potentially at home. So we have to think about both the soft side and the hard side of the cyber civil affairs interface. On the soft side, you have the urban environment, which is a likely venue, and that's a very dense information environment. It's a dense civilian environment, and it's not neutral. And that's where civil affairs is so important to operate. And we absolutely have to maintain that persistent access, and when I talked about the rivalry between the major powers, you think about, for example, China scrabbling for cobalt in Africa. Because why? Because we need that for green energy, because we have this major competition for rare earth minerals. And so the United States, if it cedes that ground, is potentially at a material disadvantage. And it cedes that ground when it loses the goodwill of its friends and allies. So civil affairs is absolutely critical and has to be thought about in that way. But also on the hard side, there's the critical infrastructure itself. And when I say cyber and critical infrastructure, I don't just mean the cyber critical infrastructure, which is there, right? The supervisory control and data acquisition systems, et cetera. You have potential cyber attacks on critical infrastructure that actually can have cascading effects because you need the energy for the transportation, et cetera, right? So civil affairs here again is not just about populace control, but it's about resource control. And this is a kind of thinking about the connection between civil affairs and warfighting, or civil affairs, even worse, in homeland security and defense, support to the civil authority, or actually somehow engaged more actively at home, which it hasn't been in a very, very long time. The Army has not. Unfortunately, it's something that we need to seriously think about in future, because the military ability to mobilize depends upon the critical infrastructure that is largely in civilian hands, is largely in the private sector. This is true for our friends and allies forward, often as it is for us. And so some hard things to think about is, I guess, the point that I want to leave you with, that this information revolution has changed civil affairs dramatically. And we need to think about both the hard and soft side of the implications of this for civil affairs, and prepare and assess for both foreign and domestic operations.
Wow, Karen, thank you very much. Pretty intellectually provocative stuff there. And I'm going to come back to you in a minute with a couple of follow-ups. So Stanislava, so you talked about the interagency energy with GFA as a litmus test. So could and integrated deterrence, can you talk about how the organization, and you hit upon it, but if you would like to elaborate on how organizations need to adapt, what are some of the things that CA officers and NCOs can do at the individual tactical level that it rolls up to operational and strategic level? What do you think about that?
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, I think this is a very important point, because I found myself oftentimes, when you are either working on the stuff, working in the field like I was, and then at the headquarters level, we always, as thinkers, we sit and we want to come up with the next most sophisticated mechanism and structure, and sort of an integrated sort of model to follow that can kind of get the job done. And there's never lack of really smart people thinking about really smart structures. What has become evident, certainly in my own experience, having been on the doing side and on the thinking side, and now back on both of these sides, is that so much of this, and it has been mentioned, everyone's basically mentioned it, so much of this comes down to the individual level, to the personality. And there's evidence to show, definitely in places where you had good integrated interagency organizations. And despite them being kind of, the Maserati of interagency, it didn't work because you didn't have the right personalities at the table. On the contrary side, you also had contexts in which you did not really have very good civil military architecture thought through how to do this better. And it still worked because you found kind of natural instinct. I do like to think that, these people kind of instinctively find each other and find ways to come together at the table. So a lot of this is really thinking about who is, I wouldn't say that there is, one persona. I'm sure someone has thought of it, kind of the Myers-Briggs test of the perfect civil affairs officer, the perfect State Department or USAID officer. But a lot of this is really more about stepping outside of our comfort zone and asking questions, which is what I think I was trying to say when I got cut off. And a lot of it is knowledge. There certainly is, as I mentioned before, a very strong impetus for engaging those who have worked in these fragile spaces now into the softer arms of foreign policy. And there's plenty of those people, and certainly for SOF, we know that they went from 30,000 to 70,000 during the heights of the war. So there's definitely a big recruitment pool of people that have experienced these spaces. This is not to dismiss the kind of, the lethal work that SOF does and the non-lethal work that SOF does. But there's definitely so much to work with there, and we really shouldn't turn away from that. I think that, again, it goes to really kind of being a strategist in the field, which is very, very hard to do, because if you were to send a young, 20-year-old corporal to the field, they may not have the many years of experience to be having this conversation, and you're expecting them to be strategic, and it's almost an unfair ask. But the more we have this conversation, the more we re-energize it at the policy, operational, and tactical levels, the more I think we can really capitalize on some of those strengths that already exist.
No, that's fantastic. I appreciate the additional clarification. Hey, so Karen, over to you. You talked about infrastructure. And that also leads into a question you Van Roosen had talked about or asked. What authorities exist for U.S. military CA support to domestic operations? If you could either handle that separately or
no, it's such a good question. It's a great question, because it's really a sticky point, right? And I would put forward that after September 11, we had pretty clearly determined that there was this home game and an away game, and we established a Homeland Security Department, right? So at home, for that, that's kind of the mark of a sophisticated professional military, is that it's oriented toward external defense, against adversaries, external adversaries, and then you have police at home, right? And then the police weren't enough at home on 9/11. So we had to have this Homeland Security structure built. However, the question is how robust we are there in case of a worst case scenario. And it's very difficult for the military at this point, for the Army at this point, to look at what's involved in backing up all of the layers that we do have, because we do have very important layers, right? We do have, the governor's authorities, et cetera. So we have those in place, and yet we still have this challenge of, what if we're in this absolute Homeland Defense scenario, worst case, where is that line? And I think one of the critiques of the National Defense Strategy is it's really kind of not drawing that line that clearly as to when and where and how and under what authorities that's going to happen. Somebody's made a comment on it in the chat, it looks like, too, talking about it does, the 357 does talk about DSCA, but it doesn't, you know, kind of, I think, clarify it the way that we really need to have some traction at this point.
But Karen, I mean, are there certain things that our allies and partners actually have authority to do and we don't? I mean, but is that enough of a appetizer to get a response?
That's a great research project right there. That's such a great research project. I've been working on this project at Army Cyber Institute called Jack-Voltaic, which is a critical infrastructure preparedness project that's at the community level. It's really quite ideal for civil affairs. We've been doing these exercises that involve, you know, local leaders and, you know, hopefully the military, local installation commanders, and the private sector in the area, leaders in the various industrial components. And it's actually quite challenging to put one of these exercises together. It's very challenging to get those parties together. And you know, you find that at the federal level, we're seeing a lot of high level exercises happening, but not these kind of community, civil, military, multi-sector is the key here, because a lot of them will be single sector. The financial sector will have its exercise, or the energy sector will have its exercise. But the multi-sector is very hard to get. And I've been looking to see what examples there are abroad of who is doing this right. You know, what is Estonia doing, for example? That's a question if anyone on you know, on this discussion has leads for me, I would really love to hear about it. Or if anybody wants to get involved in Jack-Voltaic, please do reach out.
No, thank you very much. Hey, so I'll go one more individual question for both of you, and then a few questions are starting to pile up. Stanislava, so you talked a little bit about the soft work, but not everything, but so many commanders ask about what's the measure of performance? What's the measure of effectiveness? How do I know, should I give you more money? Is this project working? And some projects are just projects to get people talking. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, I'm a big believer in 3 cups of tea, but I'm generally only funded for 0.9 cups of tea. So that's the question, the comment. If you'd elaborate from a PhD level on what I tried to say, I'm sure the group would appreciate it.
So I want to pick up on something which I think it was Assistant Secretary of Defense Mayor earlier who talked about coming to the table and sort of having these meetings, and when money is ready to be given, it's like whoever's been participating in the conversation, that's kind of who gets the money. I'm using that almost as a reverse point to my my bigger response, which is that the first thing is just to come to the table and get a sense of, you know, sort of saturating to the conversation and understand and realize that we all measure these things in a completely different way, because we all have different objectives. Yes, there's kind of foreign policy, but yet you still have multiple agencies and everybody will look at it from their own specific objective. It's extremely difficult to measure and assign numbers. I mean, we all love numbers. You know, if the number, if you cannot measure it, it does not exist. That's kind of the mantra oftentimes behind these things. And of course, that's not that. We know that that's not true. We know that we can have an impact and we can absolutely make kind of achieve effects, you know, positive effects or negative effects among a population in a sort of soft power way. So what do I do if I build a well and no one's using it, or there's no follow-up? There can be, well, first of all, if it breaks and there's no follow-up, what does that mean? Have I achieved my objective? And maybe I did for the moment when I implemented the project, but in the longer term, I actually might have done some harm to the other actors with whom I'm supposed to be in agency integrating, such as the NGOs, implementing partners of USAID, and so on, who are kind of seen as a development actor in that space. But essentially, I'm the one that stood up the project to begin with. I mentioned this because somehow we pick up on these obstacles and do not sort of like harm consequences, if you will, and those we measure. It's like everything that went wrong. You built this school, you did this, whatever it might be, refurbishment, and now you've sort of walked away. And I think we need to just realize that the more we do this, the more we integrate, which is essentially what we're all arguing for today, the more we come together to the table, the more I think we're going to struggle with finding ways where we can all work off of the same measurement matrix. And that, to me, is the conversation starter, to kind of realize that there will always be differences and things that we cannot measure and things where we will do harms, sort of, do harm onto each other as we go through this process. But despite all of that, we should be willing to come to the table and have this conversation. Dollar figure attached to it. I hope that answers your question, Chris.
No, yeah, absolutely. Perfect. Thanks. And then Karen, a little bit of change here for you, and then I'm going to go to the audience. But you spent some time at the Naval Postgraduate School, and then you were helping train civil affairs officers there. Can you take some of the experiences that you had there and some of maybe the digital work that you're doing now? And is there stuff that you would have taught us before that you know about now to help us better integrate into that cyber civil affairs world? And then after that answer, I'll go to the audience. Over to you, Karen.
I like that question. Such happy memories, and I see former students on the line, and it's really like, it feels like a reunion. It's super cool. I wish we were all in person and could go for a drink or
next year.
So good to see you. I wish we could go for a glass of wine or a cup of tea or something all together after. Yeah, I think that training is on my mind, and education, obviously, because I'm an educator, but also in response to some of the interesting comments that we're getting on the chat. I think that the role of working together, just the fact of being in the classroom, and especially if we could put together more international with the American civil affairs communities in that education and training, I think would be really helpful. So I think I would have loved to have done more of that. I think, we looked at the sector's approach to the environment, right? The civilian environment. And it's so difficult to identify which particular skill sets at any particular time you want to advocate to create for something like a 38 golf program. And I think the community is doing great, though, in adapting to what is an evolving information environment. People ask me, well, when I was at the cyber college, what's a civil affairs person doing at a cyber college? And now that I'm here at a civil affairs meetings, what's a cyber person doing? And the linkage is, I was looking at the civil dimension of military operations, and they're both quite related. And I think if I had a class today of civil affairs students, I think I would have a much more eclectic group. I think I would mix you all up a little bit more with other nationals, other MOSs, et cetera.
No, super, thanks. Hey, so over to the audience. Basir's been waiting a while here. Given Kaspersky losing its market share and reputation, given the similar situation with troll factories, will they develop a symbiotic relationship with PSMCs like Wagner? This one's for you, Karen. I mean, where do you see that going in the cyber world?
Oh my gosh, I knew there were sophisticated questions coming, because throughout the day, I saw some of the AI kind of questions that were in the chat. And I was like, oh, wow, this is a really sophisticated group. Yeah, I'm really not, I really wish I had a good answer for that, because it's very tricky in this era of deglobalization and decoupling to figure out where we're going next, because our supply chains have been so intermingled. We have been for so long reliant on, various different national origins of things that were, making us run effectively or keeping us safe. I do not know fully if we're going to end up with a balkanization of the cyberspace that is truly segmented, or if there's going to be some way we can have a rapprochement, but it's a political question at the global level, I think. The Kaspersky question specifically, whoever asked it, is there something about it I'm not addressing though?
Actually, perhaps it's difficult to guess exactly what is going to happen, but just knowing their modus operandi and the way they think and so forth. And obviously it would be the civil affairs community that's going to be at the forefront and at the front line in encountering it. So knowing what their end game is and how they have behaved, what would be your words of wisdom, ma'am? And I'm also a big fan of the U.S. Naval Postgraduate School. I haven't been there, but I took part in several massive multiplayer online war game, leveraging internet, Mowgli's, and did achieve good scores. So I think it would also be very useful in the current line of effort, ma'am. Thank you very much for your service.
Thanks, Mr. Karen, over a couple of comments on his, and we'll go to the next question.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think those guys at Moves at MPS, the modeling virtual environments simulations guys are, I'm a huge fan. I think that's actually a really good idea for a problem like the Wagner Group or Kaspersky, is to do some of that, to play out some of those scenarios, but to play them out, I think, with a group of players who are diverse ourselves. That would be my word of wisdom. I don't have a solution, but I maybe have a way that we could start looking for a solution, if that's something.
No, I mean, that's a great starting point, right? So Karen, this one's going to go to you, but then Stanislava, any comments at the tail end? So this is kind of from Charles here. It kind of makes an assumption with the integration of cyber and CA in regards to threats towards civil infrastructure. How would CA teams integrate into that assessment?
Really good question. It's because, I think that this problem is kind of everything everywhere all at once, right? And hearing the general earlier talking about wanting to make sure that civil affairs operations today aren't costing civil affairs preparedness for operations tomorrow, that's a really important trade-off. And when we're talking about critical infrastructure domestically, that sounds like something that seems far removed. And maybe it is, but I kind of have this little idea. If we could find ways, just as we have done with some of our key partner nations, doing some kinds of exercises to bring together, sometimes that is as important as some of the other things that we do that are actual operations. And so if we had the civil affairs with their expertise in understanding for example, the ASCOPE framework, that's really relevant for domestic critical infrastructure protection, but I don't see it used domestically. And I think those kinds of skills at assessment and understanding what's going on in the civilian environment in terms also of events that are happening, right? The E and the ASCOPE that often gets missed is really key. And so I would say if we could perhaps get some of our civil affairs experts together with our Homeland Security experts, just as people who are helping put together an exercise. That's all you have to do. But then you know each other, and then you have a sense of how each other operates. And God forbid it be required that we would step in the regular army, the civil affairs, that would be handy.
No, super. Stanislava, any particular comments on the integration there? Mute button.
Sorry, I want to talk a little bit about the point on the local community level. This is the level that I was very strongly looking at in some of my sort of projects and thinking. And I always, as I would have conversations within the community, I would usually get two responses, which is, well, it's not the military's job to be going out and, doing things in the community. It's like, it really should be another part of the interagency. It should be USAID, or it really should be, the State Department is dealing with it. So I am just wanting to really tackle a little bit of this very kind of hot potato as to, once you get down to the tactical level and people really have to integrate, what happens? And I always like to kind of use the example of, in a space. So first of all, a couple of things. On the DOS side, diplomats are assigned to an embassy. They're not assigned to go and spend long periods of time in a local village. They would go and visit. They would do part of their own research and kind of reconnaissance for their work and portfolio. They have to be they have to have a sense as to what's being done in country, but they're not permanently based in the field. Same with USAID. 95% of USAID's work is done by implementing partners. So it's not even directly done by USAID officers as such. So who's in the field, who's actually equipped to be there and have that engagement with local communities is the civil affairs side. And one of the things from talking to local communities and getting their perceptions and how they see all of this, in their minds, whoever is on the field, whoever is doing that project, that becomes the development actor in their mind, or the humanitarian actor, or the security actor. And there really is not a huge difference. I know from talking to one instance, they said, well, they just kind of see us all as foreigners, and that's kind of it. Now, a strong local partnership with the local force mitigates that, and they should be in the lead. This goes now into the whole FID space, and it's very important to ensure that CA is not seen as doing this is doing something different. But there's also quite a bit of kind of sensitivity around the local force and the training force, and both are trying to kind of get in with the local populations. And I'm very happy to talk offline about the sort of some of the competition that can happen in that relationship too. So I would just like to remind us that there is a very important element to the who's deployed to do what, and we can talk about this integration. But at the end of the day, there are security restrictions to whether I can go, or, if Karen and I show up and want to do a research project, that's a whole other thing. You can't, there's just so much more to optics than who within the interagency should be dealing with this. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
No, that's a great point, right? And so, for almost every event, or issue, there's a lead federal agency that is theoretically supposed to be, manned, staff, trained, equipped to do that. But it's frequently, that disaster declaration that brings the military in, and there's some nuanced sentence in there that, oh, it's the unique skill. Yeah, sorry that we have the C-17s, but you can contract for a bunch of that stuff. So this has been a great conversation, all the way from the local level to the strategic level and talking about policy. We didn't get to everybody in the comments. There's some good chat going on about CA and, foreign overseas missions versus domestic and defense security cooperation, or DISCA support the local authorities there, right? And so all of that needs to be looked at for every event, and figuring out whether CA does have a domestic role is kind of interesting. So I'll just leave the chat where it is. Stanislava, if you have a minute or less that you would just like to impart on us, and then Karen, a minute over to you, and then I'll yield back to Chris Holchek, and we'll talk about next year's themes already. So Stanislava, please.
Just a couple of things. The first one is to reinforce some of the figures we have behind us, which is that by 2030, 1 in 4 people in the world will be living in these fragile spaces that we're talking about. Again, these will not be conventional spaces for any of these actors. They will be kind of long-term, constantly shifting between security and insecurity. So that is the first data point. The second thing is, I think Assistant Secretary Witkowsky mentioned about playing the long game, the 10-year, the 10-year country plans. And I feel like there's an immediate allergic reaction to when you say that to kind of a military person. It's like, no, deployment, the military is not there to stay and do this. Like we should be, it's an in and out thing. But these are long-term engagements for prevention. And they certainly, a security force assistance program can have the length of a development program that can be just a few years or multiple years. And that's the marriage, that long-term thinking about what this means, 5 years out and 10 years out. And it goes back to stepping outside of our comfort zone, stepping outside of timelines around money, timelines around mandates, timelines around appointments, timelines around elections, and so on, and think about these things in the long term and more generationally. And I think that would be a good starting point.
Oh, super. Thank you. Karen, over to you.
Thank you so much. I would love to have a capture of the chat because I see so many.
I'll send it to you.
Yeah, such great contributions in there. I agree that this concept of prevention that Stanislav is talking about is so welcome and it's overdue. And I think it really is key because that's where civil affairs have been our military diplomats, right, who've been engaged all of this time. And, I think it was George Kennan who said after World War II, because the United States had been a comparatively benign occupier, it had goodwill, and it wasn't like the way the Russians or the Germans occupied or the Japanese occupied. And he said as his guidance, first use your moral authority. Use that moral authority. And I think civil affairs is a good example of that. So the prevention is engagement. And I don't know that I didn't necessarily mean to set off a huge explosion talking about domestic operations. Maybe it's because I was revisiting 357 in preparation for this, but I've also had Installation Management Command on my mind quite a lot and thinking about the very complex problem of the critical infrastructure protection at home. Certainly, I think the best place for us to start is helping with the critical infrastructure protection abroad. And that is one of the reasons why we have civil affairs experts who are largely reservists, who have skills in those sectors, who can come and contribute that as part of America's engagement and in supporting of the authorities, the civilian authorities abroad, right? First and foremost, the host nationals that you want to empower above even our own agencies, right? Our own agencies want to empower those host nationals. So that's all there. And anybody who wants to help me explore this other hot potato issue or not, just reach out separately. But thank you so much for this opportunity.
No, fantastic panel. Thank you so much for your support and all the effort that both you super intellectual giants put into it. And I appreciate personally and professionally the big fans of CA and how you make us think and be better officers and non-commissioned officers and soldiers, especially in the civil affairs realm. So thank you so much. Chris Holshek, that'll wrap up this panel. Over to you, 1500 sharp, for any additional guidance or instructions for your next note.
Okay. All right. So let's see. Where am I? Anybody seen me on video? Yeah, you got me on video. All right. Well, Stanislava and Karen, Stanislava already has contributed to the 1CA podcast, but I would suggest both of you, this discussion was so rich. We actually have a platform for you to capture your thoughts. In addition to the 1CA podcast, we have this thing called the Eunomia Journal. And you are more than welcome to impart your wisdom to us there. Keep the dialogue going. That goes in between the events like the roundtable and the symposium and so on, and all. all of those different things. Anybody, in fact, if you have something really, I know a lot of you have had some really poignant comments in the chat sections, and it sounds like you're qualified well for making the contribution. Because one of the things we've worked very hard on over the last few years is to create what a former SWIX commander called intellectual capitalization platform. And the main weapon, and it wasn't just Mattis, but the main weapon for civil affairs is that gray matter between the left and the right ear. That's what we bring to the fight. It's not the weapons we wield in our hands, it's the weapons we wield in our hands. And so again, the richer, and thank you, Karen, for your compliment on the level of sophistication of the conversation. Welcome back, by the way, to the fray.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm so delighted to be back.
I had to kind of cajole you a little bit.
Yeah.
I promise you a cup of coffee over at the cafe in Cornwall. Which I will, honor. So, so now we're at this time. It's an annual cycle we do, where we think about the future of civil affairs, but then we sort of narrow the field a little bit by talking about something that is topical in such a way that it captures kind of the zeitgeist, of what's going on, and enables us to provide a cogent discussion of civil affairs in the context of current strategy, current policy, in ways that we can, and through this process, really through the issue papers, call for papers, and the selection of the papers in the fall, and in the symposium, through that discussion, and then capturing that discussion and bringing it to here, to the roundtable, and bringing it to the policy level and letting the policy level talk to us. So we have this conversation going. And I get, and the facilitators, we get the great honor and pleasure and challenge trying to capture that all in some sort of a roundtable. But other than that, it's pretty easy. So I'm going to share my screen because I want to talk about next year. And here are some things that I jotted down from not only this year's discussion, but some of the discussion today. So, that came out of this idea of winning without fighting. And then some of the comments, again, that I heard. And so I kind of throw this out for the next 20 or so minutes. Let's have a conversation about what are we going to talk about next year? What should we be writing papers? What should we be discussing as an expanded civil affairs corps in concert with our partners and allies, that wide and expanding global network that we really need to build if we are going to kind of stay ahead of the game, if you will. So here are a few. Let's see, civil affairs, a force for prevention and integrated deterrence. This is raw thoughts here. This is not refined, but that's why I want to present it to you all. I can jot down a few words and to put the Hugh Van Roosen was part of the conversation. That's great. Okay, so the other one is civil military integration. This has really bubbled up, particularly today, this idea, again, in the context of integrated deterrence, but what's the role of civil affairs in Global Fragility Act, the U.S. strategy to prevent conflict? How do we make that understanding of the CA role there a bit more granular than what it already is? It's not as granular as another really interesting insight, and this is General Beaupert's contribution in his conversation last fall, was this idea of securing the victory. You know, one of the reasons we have these conversations is we try to find ways to help people. We try to educate, you know, beyond the civil affairs core to those people as Assistant Secretary Witkowsky exhorted us to do, continue to help educate people on what civil affairs is really about. And this idea of securing the victory has always been understood as something that is post-conflict. But the truth of the matter is, and this is what General Beaupre brought to the fore, was securing the victory can happen anywhere. It can happen prior to conflict. It can happen during conflict. It can happen obviously in post-conflict, but it can set the conditions for the non-use of force as easily as it does. So, so that's a thought. And I added, give it again a little bit more focus, this idea of securing the victory through competing in campaigning. And the role of civil affairs in campaigning seems to be a little bit of a growing in the remarks that we heard from General Johnson, and as well as the ASD Solar. So there's an area that we can explore. The other thing is in recognition that civil affairs is now an information force as opposed to an information related force. And with the new FM 3-0, this idea of the human dimension, okay, it's not the human domain, but but implicit in all of that is a very important point that we've been trying to make again in the idea of rebranding or changing the understanding of civil affairs, is to think of capabilities, these winning without fighting capabilities, like civil affairs, as maneuver forces, but not necessarily in the physical domains. I wrote about this in a piece I did so years ago for the USA, and I also mentioned it. I did for the Modern War Institute, but the idea of understanding CA and PSYOP and IO and FAOs and engagement type forces as maneuver forces in the moral dimensions of the moral space of war and peace, and in between war and peace. So perhaps that's an area that we can explore. This may be, and I gave General Johnson a bit of a warning earlier today. This may be an area that may need to kind of continue to develop, but I definitely think we could probably devote an entire year's discussion on the relationship between civil affairs, artificial intelligence, and cyber war. Simply because if you understand that the center of, war being fundamentally political, being fundamentally logical, and being fundamentally people-centric, all those things, civil affairs is astride all of this sort of center of gravity of modern warfare. And we are going to have to become warriors that have a much more than a familiarity with things like artificial intelligence and so. We may not be a cyber capability, but we will either inform that sort of operational field or be informed by that in many different ways, both of those fields. So that could be an area discussion. Maybe it's time to do it. Maybe we should wait another year. I don't know. And then the one that I've discussed with Chris Stockel and I, we were kind of contemplating this weeks ago. What seems to be looming so large, of course, is Ukraine. And I remember something Joe Krohley brought up to me too the other month was, we may be at a similar moment right now in history as we were maybe in, say, 1940 and 1941, when we started to think about what is going to happen after the surrender of Germany. We started to think about all this stuff before even Pearl Harbor. But maybe we need that kind of strategic vision at least CA Corps, because somehow or another within the next year, there's going to be something that's going to come out of the Ukraine war, whether it's a settlement, but even if it's a settlement, it isn't going to be like World War II. It's going to lapse into another phase of the war, which could include things like artificial intelligence, cyber warfare, all of these different, it's going to be very information intensive. It is going to be very regular warfare intensive. So maybe this is a great discussion that we could have with the 92nd, particularly can help us with this. Reach out to our comrades in Ukraine, and maybe in this discussion we can actually help facilitate a conversation about the war after the war, after this, whatever this outcome is in Ukraine, and how do we go about building civil military capacity, resistance and resilience. How do we help Ukraine with the civil military capacities it's going to need to prosecute that next phase or the next war after this? Because if anybody thinks that this war is going to end between Russia and Ukraine in some sort of ticker tape parade or something like that, I think so. It's similar to World War II. We've got to think about what happens after this, but it's going to be a very different scene, because there's going to be a war after the war, and there's going to be and CA. Our role as the United States is not. Our role is going to be more indirect and direct in helping this stabilization, rebuilding, getting Ukraine ready for the next round in this boxing. So those are some of the thoughts that I jotted down during the day as we were discussing. So the floor is open to comments. I've got to bring the chat up here. Let me figure out how to do that. So I'm not sure. Okay. If you've got it, okay.
So we've got a hand raised from Wayne Culbreath as well.
Wayne, in fact, Wayne, thank you. And I know you've got something to announce, and just so keep your powder dry on that. Let's see. No, go ahead and if it's probably going to be part of what you're going to say. So go ahead and make mention of the event that you were talking to me about in the chat room. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Real quick, I'm an inbound 38 Golf. I was on the ground in Kyiv, Ukraine a couple of weeks ago. The new president of American University in Kyiv is a former Army officer, Dan Rice, who I served with in Iraq in 2005. Dan's been special advisor to General Zaluzhny for the last year before he took this position. Long story shorter, he's putting together a joint conference between Ukraine military and U.S. counterparts. Dan's been working with 18th Airborne Corps when they were covering down on the mission there, and is working with SecDef's office on communication. But the idea is to get counterparts in Ukraine connected with subject matter experts in the U.S. that can talk about things like economic reconstruction, demining. There's thousands of hectares of land that are scattered with UXO right now that can't go into production for agriculture. It's those kind of issues that we want to start connecting subject matter expert to decision maker on the ground. So just kind of a warning, this is coming together pretty quick. We're going to send all this information through the appropriate channels and chain of command so everyone can sign off on the validity of it. But right now it's tentatively 20 and 21 May. It's going to be largely online, although there'll be a live portion in Kyiv at American University in Ukraine. But we want to get as much participation from the CA community as possible. So that's just a warning. It's to that very last point. There's a lot of things that can be done now with that idea that Colonel was just talking about. Of let's start thinking about this now. Let's get subject matter experts from our side connected to their counterparts on the ground in Ukraine, and we can start making a difference now, even though we're not on the ground. Thanks, sir.
And Wayne, let me throw in there. I just put the specifics about that meeting in the chat for all of the participants to see.
Roger. Thanks, sir.
Great. That certainly makes that last bullet point that I had more interesting. Thanks, Wayne. Wayne, if you would, I'm gonna, as soon as I can figure out how to get back on. I'll put my email in the chat room for anybody that wants to send me their thoughts. Post conversation. Wayne, I would really appreciate it if you could. Any others?
Say again, sir.
Yeah, just I'm gonna my email. I'm just trying to figure out. I don't know why I can't. Okay, stop sharing my screen. I can't figure out how to get in the chat. Okay, so holshek@hotmail.com is my email address. Wayne, if you could just ping me so I can make sure I get all the information. We're very happy, by the way, to help you get the word out to the Civil Affairs Corps. We have a lot of followers on LinkedIn and Facebook, so we can help you get the word out on this. Kind of call.
Roger, sir. Thanks.
Okay. Anybody got any other thoughts or ideas or suggestions? Yeah, maybe too long. Chris, Civil Affairs, key integrator of U.S. military applications in maritime gray zone campaigning. Are we implying there that we're going to try to bring back naval civil affairs? Why not understand that? John, you want to come up and explain your idea there?
Yeah, this is John. Can you hear me?
Got you, John.
Great. Yeah, so so thanks for letting me be a part of this discussion. Great talk here. Just some thoughts here in terms of as the Army's looking at where they fit in terms of Indo-Pacific and what they do. There might be something there, just a thought on where civil affairs fits in. And certainly in terms of when I'm talking integration, I'm talking about integrating, could be Army, Navy, joint capabilities, usually non-information related. I brought up a couple examples in the chat earlier, such as engineers. Basically, usually these competencies that can provide direct services below the threshold of conflict in theater security cooperation, even explosive ordnance disposal, for example. The key is with these teams is having somebody on these teams who knows what to look for. And this is where civil affairs brings the expertise, I think. Not necessarily in going and trying to assess the ports themselves, but in going with harbor security operations teams or with cargo handling teams that know what to look for in terms of infrastructure, but civil affairs knows what to look for in terms of cultural considerations, adversary influence, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of where I'm coming from there. It's a long title, but I guess my question is, do we have to settle on specific things here, and then people are going to write to it, or can people submit articles on whatever they want and maybe accept it?
It's okay, John. To answer your question, it's all of the above. What basically the process is this: is we have this live discussion now while we're all stimulated, and I jot down some notes. And then I try to kind of pull this all together, and then I go ahead and draft a call for papers. You've probably seen the call for papers. The the event description that we have usually in both the symposium and the roundtable are kind of offshoot of that. But that usually we work that through the executive committee of the association, and then we settle on that, and then we go ahead and post it for it. You know, at the same time, so in the process of this, if you afterwards, which is why I put my email in holshek@hotmail.com, if you have thoughts after this, if you're all stimulated and you're sitting there having a cup of coffee in another hour or two, and you say, oh yeah, why not this? Look, send me your stuff. I will consider everything. And what I usually try to do is a kind of a fusion process. And this is how we wind up with the themes that we've wound up with the last few years. This is the process. So if you have any thoughts later, I would say within the next week or two, get them to me, and I will pull them in and consider them. But if you want to write something in the Eunomia journal, there are many ways that people can contribute, and not all of us are willing to do a complete issue paper or whatever. But I mean, we have a very lively discussion that goes on LinkedIn. So you can go there. We have a very lively discussion on Facebook. So that we provide all these different platforms, these different avenues for people to use to get their thoughts across. And just because we don't pick something that you really think we should talk about or have not somehow worked it in, and your idea sounds like something that would be integrated with another idea of a somewhat larger scale that could be discussed as a single paper, for example. That would be my take on having done this at least 15 years. But if anybody here has something that they think needs to see the light of day, then pick the platform you most find comfortable doing that and do it, or develop your idea, through our social media sites. That's how a lot of ideas get developed and refined and tossed about. So we'll be looking at all of that in the next couple of weeks or so, and then coming up with something. But what we try to do, the approach we have here, which is a very different forced development approach, if you will, is we try to do this through sort of a crowdsourcing platform as much as we can. We make this inclusive and integrative, and this is our approach. So again, thanks for the contribution. Anyone else that wants to chime up? Chime in.
Hey, this is Colonel Farina. I just have a closing thing. I don't know if the other services have this, but the Marine Corps stood up a cyber auxiliary. I think you might have seen this a little while back with General Neller addressing our second comment on ago about blue hair data people. We are looking to expand, not necessarily the blue hair data people, but it is bringing in networked industry individuals. A lot of them are prior military, and it's a way of connecting and networking. But we use them throughout the Marine Corps. Now, specifically with cyber, we're working through some legislative proposals to adjust some of it, but we're also expanding it into the civil affairs community and some of our other information related MOSs. So I just offer that when we talk about connecting in forums, and I know the Coast Guard has something similar, but a lot of times we leverage this to bring in industry professionals to support a lot of our guys on the ground. Thank you for allowing me a few moments. Over.
Colonel, thank you very much for that. That is very helpful, and it was in fact this idea of CAA as a kind of an information maneuver force is something I lifted out of the Marine presentation. And we get an awful lot of good ideas from the Marines. Now
it's good to be useful.
Yeah, it's very useful. Very useful idea. So thank you for that. Anyone else? Okay, well, look, it's no problem. Again, holshek@hotmail.com, holshek@hotmail.com. And if you come up with any thoughts or ideas that you want to share with me on next year's theme, please send them to me. What I will do now is I'll go back to share screen here for a second. And what I want to do is again remind you, we're again a bit late this year. We normally get these out in mid-March, but this is really all but finished. And we'll be posting the PDF electronic version of the Civil Affairs issue papers. I think there were some people that were in our committee that were looking at these papers when we first got them last fall. And now that I look at them, I mean, the power of people, civil affairs and civil resistance, reclaiming civil affairs as a strategic asset, identifying deep expertise for the benefit of the Army, civil military operations in the age of artificial intelligence, refining the civil affairs value proposition, governance in the modern operational environment, and social sciences contribution to civil affairs. The remark that I've gotten from a few people on our committee is, for some reason, these papers are even more relevant now than when we got them back last, which is a sign of success. I think you're going to enjoy reading these papers. They're going to give you some really good food for thought. And then we have the symposium report posted. So upcoming events, we have the Civil Affairs Annual Meeting we did last year. It's the time we've done it in a few years since before COVID, since 2019, which the fall of 2019, when we were in Tampa, was the last sort of in-person event that we did. And then we did one in Carlisle last October, the annual meeting. Pending the discussion with the executive committee and the president, we'll determine whether or not we want to do that. Maybe we'll combine it with the symposium. Maybe we'll just have the symposium like we did. But in any case, that's to be determined. Right now, we have the Civil Affairs Symposium, which is, again, another online event. It's 2 days instead of 2.5 days. It's actually more like 1.5 days, almost a little short of 2 days. On the 13th and 14th of November, which is a Monday and Tuesday. So mark your calendars. It's already in the events folder. I've already uploaded all of the slide decks that were used in the Civil Affairs Association resources. You go to Resources tab and you go to Resource Library. You click on there. You go to Events folder and then you click on there and open it up for 2023. And then inside there's another folder called Roundtable. And there are all of the events for the Roundtable and for the previous year you did. Again, you have to be able to log in to get to it. So do us a favor if you are not subscribing, on the website to get the emails and get notifications and so all that sort of thing. Please subscribe as a minimum. Think about joining. Membership is not that much money. It's a couple of lattes a year. And think about joining the association. And for those of you who are already members of the association and are excited and stimulated by the kinds of things you've seen, and you're not a director, we're always looking for fresh blood, especially younger blood. And we're in the midst of a generational turnover right now in the leadership of the association, and we would welcome your interest in becoming an active member of the association. And then again, like I said, in addition, follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Stitcher, all those social media platforms that exist. And stay in the fight. That's pretty much it for me. I'm going to now, I guess, return control of your TV set to our president, the Major General retired Hugh Van Roozeman, And for those of you who don't know, as I said, you and I go back a long way. One of the most really important insights that I've heard in quite a few years came from you when he was a speaker at a roundtable. I think it was 3 or 4 years ago. You know, we talk about, well, you know, when are we going to get CA back into SOF and all that sort of thing. And Hugh's perspective that I thought was extremely helpful was, let's stop looking at the diversity of our as a problem and think of it as a strength. Because we can engage in all different ways. We can engage as active component, SOF. We can engage as conventional civil affairs and reserves. We can engage as Marines. We can engage as CIMIC. We can engage in all these different ways. Think about the expanded Civil Affairs Corps in those terms. And then what you find is we bring a tremendous strength to the commanders that we support, to the global, the geographic combatant commands that we support in particular, and especially the complexity of competition that is involved, the civil part, the military part, the economic part, the military part, and so on. We have a lot of people who can fill in all those different niches, and as Assistant Secretary Witkowsky pointed out to us, is we bring a unique skill and mindset to this that a lot of people don't have, and we're able to bring people together that may not otherwise get together and do things that really help to kind of push the needle and move the ball downfield. So it's one of the most important insights that I think I've got civil affairs in my life. Thank you for that, Hugh. And with that thought in mind, I turn over the floor to you.
Chris, thank you very much. And I'd like to pay a particular thanks to the nearly 130 people that participated at the high end of today's session. It's been a long one, but the fact that we've had about 80 people that have actually stuck all the way through the end of the symposium today, you know, that really says quite a lot. It's been a really interesting session today. Chris, you captured, actually I've been taking notes as well, and you captured all of that in your little PowerPoint slide. The only things that I had that weren't on there had to do with, you know, looking after the NATO AGP 3.19 and where that's going later this year. And that whole issue that Karen Gutierrez was talking about with marrying cyber with civil affairs. We've talked a lot today about information operations, influence, you know, and how that ties in with civil affairs. You know, there was a time many years ago that, at least on the active component side, everyone received both PSYOP and CA training at the same time. You know, perhaps this is something we need to look at if there's a bit more synergy that needs to be addressed in the future. So a wonderful opportunity to listen to some great comments from Department of Defense, Department of State, our various components, Marine Corps, as well as active and reserve forces in the Army. We've had the opportunity to listen to NATO and other international partners. We've had the opportunity to listen to academia. But the only thing we missed here was business and industry. And that we may see more of that in the future as we're looking at some of the opportunities that present itself. So a really good session. Thank you to everyone that participated today. I think this continues to be a valuable way for us in the Civil Affairs Association to gather current thinking across the policy and doctrine side, and how that relates to our strategic, operational, tactical employment of civil affairs for the regiment in the future. So from the CAA Civil Affairs Association perspective, we want to take this forward, talk amongst ourselves on, what the next steps are for our association and how we can support these efforts with, particularly on the policy side and the doctrinal side, on engaging with appropriate leadership to have the voice of the association heard, and our recommendations factored into decisions that are being made for the future of civil affairs. So with that, I thank everyone for your contributions, your attendance, your ideas. This was very much appreciated by the Civil Affairs Association. And Chris, thank you very much for being our host and managing this throughout today. Great job. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful evening, morning, or afternoon, depending on your time zone. Thanks, folks.
Thank you all. This session will end in 1 minute. Thank you.